Night sat full and heavy on the red keep. A weathered hand pressed over the mouth of the citadel to hush it. Wind from the bay stroked the shutters and toyed with the tapestries, tasting of brine and tar and the faint sweetness of rotting fish from the quays below. The chamber smelled of boiled leather and honeyed herbs, smoke and bodies. A single brazier pulsed like a waiting heart, and the candles threw long thin ribs of light across the canopy bed where the king lay and did not sleep. He woke slowly, as if from a dive taken in armor. His eyelids lifted in increments, admitting the world a sliver at a time, the shapes of furniture, the glimmer of inlaid mother-of-pearl on the chests at the foot of the bed, the thick rope of a bell pull just within reach. Under the furs and linens, his torso was strapped tight in linen and stiffened cloth, the bindings damp against his skin. The air was cool on the bald crown of his head, once drenched in thick black hair. He tried to take a breath and found the act was a negotiation. Pain rose and set with each inhale, a pale, tired wave. He lay still and allowed the pain to name itself. There had been a hunt. The boar had churned mud with its tusks that flashed like yellowed scythes. The boar had carried the forest in its hide and the earth in its scent, and his laughter had been big enough to carry across the clearing even as he lunged. Then the wine, hot, perfumed, falsely brave, had sloshed in his gut and made his limbs a fraction slower than his younger memory promised. The boar had not stuttered or misremembered its strength. Beasts rarely did. He remembered the hit, the bitter taste of the soil, the pressure of bodies. The sky had turned a ridiculous blue that mocked him by being unchanged. Robert rolled his head a little on the pillow and winced the way a boulder would wince if boulders could confess. The ceiling above was painted with small stars. Some artisan with patient hands had set gold leaf in a night that did not change, and the tiny points of metal glinted faintly in candlelight. The sight stirred his old fondness for pretty things that did not ask questions, then irritated him for the same reason. "Majesty," came the whisper before he called for anyone. Maester Pycelle's breath had a thickness to it like warm milk left too long in a room. The man was a long figure folded in a dozen layers of gray and white, with a chain about his neck in more colors than the harbor flags carried, each link a small profession of his learning. He had fallen asleep crooked in the chair near the bed and now sat up, smoothing his beard as if doing so would tidy the room. "How fares your rest?" Robert's smile felt foreign. He lifted a hand and checked its steadiness. It obeyed him, and the king took grim satisfaction. "I'm not dead," he said. His voice had gravel in it. "Either I fare well or the gods are lazy." The maester smiled uncertainly. "Sleep is the best balm, your grace. Another draught to ease the—" No, the word held more strength than he expected, and for a moment that was enough to make him feel like a king. He swallowed. The taste of poppy lingered at the back of his mouth, sweet and thick as beeswax. "No milk, no herbs. If I'm to be dulled and draped, I'll do it with wine of my choosing." Pycelle's eyes drifted to a small table where a stoppered flask waited like a conspirator told to sit quietly. "Perhaps a little watered." Robert's gaze cut him off. The old man's lip trembled a shade and then steadied. "Where is the Lord Hand?" Robert asked. The question was heavy and simple. Pycelle folded his hands in his sleeves, as if to keep them from doing something loose against his will. "In his chambers, reading by lamplight, I believe. He has sent for reports from the city watch and other matters. He keeps wake, your grace. I told him to sleep, but he will not." "Send for him," Robert said. "No, wait." He licked his lips and stared past the maester. There, on a stand, the boar's hide had been spread and tacked to dry, coarse bristles that caught the light. Some servant's efficiency had made a trophy of it already. Robert looked at it without liking or hatred. He felt how his own eyes, always inclined to seek humor, had trouble with the moment and preferred not to find words. "Is it wise to excite yourself thus?" Pycelle asked softly. "The body heals faster when allowed to forget." "The body may forget," Robert said, "but a king's memory is paid for by others. Fetch the hand. And Ser Barristan, if he's not at his dice or asleep on a maiden's smile." "Ser Barristan will be at his post." the maester said, rebuked by habit. He rose with care, joints clicking softly like bone dice down a long table. I will send word. See that you do, and don't stop for your powders and tinctures on the way, Robert added. Then, because he could not help himself and because the old man's careful deceit irritated him like a fly he couldn't swat, he said, and if you pass a certain golden boy with a wineskin, tell him to keep to his bed. His health might fail if he wanders. Pycelle paused. His mouth opened and closed, but he was too prudent to display anything that might be taken for comprehension. He bowed instead and shambled toward the door. The king watched him go and listened to the door's latch catch, that small clean sound. The room exhaled when the old man left. Robert's eyes closed. He drifted not toward sleep but to some shore between, where the world was stitched to memory with coarse thread. The faces swam up as they always did. Thin-faced Stannis with the fire of a judge, younger Renly bright as new copper, Eddard with the winter steady in him, Cersei with her mirror-bright smile that had never belonged to him. Lyanna, too, because he could no more cease thinking of her than he could stop his heart at will. A boy's vow had outlived the boy. The thought was not new. It was a companion that did not speak, only looked at him. He became aware, by degrees, of a whisper of steel and leather, a presence that settled itself as if it had always been there. Robert opened his eyes and saw Ser Barristan Selmy standing near the foot of the bed like a white tree grown from polished bone and decades of habit. The knight's hair had gone to snow long ago, and the lines about his mouth were set deep not by frowns but by the pressure of duty against tenderness. He looked upon the king with such directness it felt like a blessing the old knight had been trusted to give only rarely. "Your grace," Barristan said, and he bowed his head. "You sent for me." "I sent for your sword and your truth," Robert said. "If one is sharp and the other dull, I'll take the sharp thing first. If my truth is dull, I should sharpen it on your displeasure," Selmy replied dryly. He stood easy, hands folded. Robert huffed a small laugh that tugged at his bandages. "Where's Stark?" "On his way." Pycelle roused him. He is what you want him to be." "What I want him to be," Robert echoed, and the words had a weight even he did not anticipate. He stared at the boar hide and then away. "There's a boy scuttling about these halls with my blood in his courage and lions on his sleeves." "Lancel Lannister," Barristan said, without either apology or attempt to lighten the remark. "A squire to the king's person." "A squire to the wineskin," Robert replied. He looked at the knight. "He poured too freely. He pressed me to drink. The wine burned like a forge and put silk on my bones. The boar ran true. I drank like a fool. Between beast and bottle, choose your enemy." "Do you ask me whom I serve?" Selmy asked, his tone unchanged. "I have never had to ask it," Robert said. His eyes were bright now. "I ask what you will do if I say to bring that boy to me with his hair torn and his courage wrung, to hear what he was told to do, and by whom." Barristan did not look away. "I will do it." Robert nodded once. The pain had retreated to its corner to watch him. "Do it quietly," he said. "Do it as if you were fetching me prayer books. And if anyone asks, tell them the king is cold and wants a shawl." "Your grace," Selmy said, with the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth. He inclined his head and turned to go, his white cloak whispering against the rushes as he moved. There was no haste in him. Haste was for men who had not made choices. The door opened, and the Lord Hand entered as the Kingsguard knight left, their passing at the threshold like one tide drawing back to make room for another. Eddard Stark wore the city poorly, as if the stones pressed their heat through his boots into his bones. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment longer than courtesy required, measuring the room as he always measured the world, quietly, against some internal line he himself kept. He was not handsome so much as exactly formed to the promises he had made and kept. Lean and a little worn, with iron in the line of the jaw and the calm of a man who harvests weather and never wastes words, Robert felt a great fondness rise in him so powerful it embarrassed him. He covered it with the old jest. "I have never seen you look so lovely," he said. "You glow like fresh snow. The snow here smells of rotting fruit and horses, Eddard said, and came to the bedside. "How is your wound?" "It would be better if I could hit something with a hammer," Robert said. "I wake and there it is, like a woman who insists I look at her every breath." Eddard's look cut toward the boar hide and then away. "You should have been more careful." "Say that again and I'll die out of spite," Robert said, but without heat. He let the silence hold itself between them, amicable. Then, "I have been asleep, Eddard, but not so long that the world changed while I was away. What I fell to out there, I confess to myself here. I drank like a man trying to make a hole in his belly for a beast to crawl into, and then I was shocked to find the beast did not oblige. But the wine did more work than the boar." Stark waited. When the king didn't continue, he said simply, "Lancel, they've been whispering to you too." He poured as if someone had told him to drown me with hospitality. Robert's voice lowered, gentled by anger that had been stabled long enough to learn rudimentary manners. "Eddard, I want the truth from him. Baratheon will fetch him. But I want the truth that matters from you." Eddard's hands were steady on the bed rail, the knuckles pale. He nodded once. "Ask. How long have you known that my heirs are yours in courtesy but not in blood?" Robert asked. There was no joy in putting the words into the air. They had weight not because they were new, but because they were old enough to reshape the floor beneath them. Eddard did not flinch. The candlelight picked out the iron tips of his hair where gray had tucked itself like first snow on winter grass. "Long enough to have wanted to tell you, and not long enough to have done so without destroying you. What you mean is you chose your moment like a man chooses the field of battle," Robert said, and the edge of his mouth curled. "The wrong field can make a brave man into cooked meat. You chose to spare me the sight of the flames a little longer. I'm not ungrateful. I am, however, awake, and the world is devoid of milk in it." Eddard nodded and stood in that still way that varies between patience and sorrow. "Do you want details?" "No," Robert said, then surprised himself by adding, "Yes, speak and make it plain." "The Book of Lineages has entries to make a maester weep for company," Eddard said, with no humor in it. "Black of hair begets black. Trueborn children inherit certain marks as sure as a river finds the sea. Your father's line stamped itself a dozen times over across bastards and legitimate alike. The queen's children wear the lion so loudly in their faces that even a blind man might hear it. I made inquiries. I counted. The boy is not yours, nor the girl, nor the younger boy. Their father is her brother." Robert closed his eyes. He had known the shape of the thing, but hearing it had a fresh chill. He remembered the way Jaime's hand had hung easy on the pommel of his sword and the careless grace with which the Lannister moved, the endless youth worn like a cloak he never took off. He remembered the way Cersei had smiled at him on the day they married, a smile that had never warmed the mouth, always the eyes, because she could make her eyes do anything, like a woman who had practiced for years. "You waited to tell me," Robert said softly, "because you feared I'd do something like drink my way into a boar's tusk, or worse, throw the city into war for the honesty of it." He opened his eyes. "You were not wrong. I was loyal," Eddard said, "to you as a man, to the realm as a steward. I told myself the truth is not always the same thing as a hammer. Some truths are hammers that swing themselves," Robert murmured. He was silent long enough for the wind to pluck once at the casement and the room to remember it was still part of the world. "It is almost funny," he said at last. "I chased a woman all my life who belonged to another man and took a wife who belonged to her brother. Somewhere, some god with a sense of humor has made a ledger and is nodding over his arithmetic." Eddard's face did not change, but something in him warmed, just slightly, as if he were relieved to find that laughter still existed. "It was always your nature to meet pain with jest. And wine," Robert added, "but not tonight." He set his teeth against a treacherous wave of dizziness. "We will not kill a king to bury a whore. We will not kill a whore to save a king. I slaughter words when I'm tired, Ned. Listen, I want the children. I want them safe. Even if they are not mine, they are children. The city will eat them if we let it. Take Tommen and Myrcella into your custody. Smile at their mother while you do it, and keep daggers in your sleeves. As for Joffrey, he trailed off. The boy's face rose up before him. Sharp chin, mouth already learning to sneer in private. Hands itching for cruelty the way other boys' hands itched for a game. He is a fire lit in the wrong field. I will not put that flame on my body. Eddard's eyes flickered, the only sign of surprise. You want me to move them before we move against her? I want, gods. Robert pinched the bridge of his nose and felt sweat there. He would not reach for a cloth. What I want is for you to be my hand, not just in title. You have always given me your judgment when I wanted ale and applause. Give it now. Tell me what must be done to keep the realm from tearing itself in righteous anger. Eddard took a breath and framed the idea like a carpenter does a beam against a wall. He knows how to read with his hands. First, control the gates. The gold cloak's answer to the city watch's commander. He was bought once and can be bought again, but not by us if we cannot agree who pays. Better that your knights hold the red keep and the gates to it, while the watch is left to preen and posture in the streets. Second, secure the ravens. You must be first to tell your story to those who will make stories of their own if you do not. Third, isolate the queen and her family. Not roughly, not so that she can call it an outrage, but thoroughly. She cannot find you a fool if she cannot find you at all. She'll find me, Robert said, a half smile, half lament. She has a talent for it. There was a knock at the door. It had rhythm to it. Firm, respectful, with just enough insistence to say the bearer could wait but would not do so forever. Baratheon entered with Lancel Lannister by the elbow. The boy's hair was a banner that didn't know which way to fly, and the pallor on his face made his freckles stand out like spilled foxglove seeds. He looked as guilty as he was and as innocent as his youth wanted him to be. He tried to kneel and fumbled it. Baratheon permitted the fumble but turned it into a controlled descent with 2 fingers on the shoulder, a little miracle of kindness. Your Grace, Selmy said, as you asked. Robert studied the boy for a while without speaking. The boy's eyes shifted in their sockets like trapped fish. He swallowed hard enough to be heard. Do you know what a man looks like when he's hunted by a boar? Robert said softly. Lancel licked his lips. Tears gathered at the brim of his lashes and did not fall. He looks afraid, Your Grace. He looks alive, Robert said. He looks as himself. You poured my wine as if you were trying to make someone else of me. The boy's gaze flinched. Who told you to keep my cup full? No matter the hour, no matter my sense? Lancel made a sound like a rabbit with a hawk's shadow on it. I would never. The Queen wishes you well. The Queen fears for your burdens and your heart. The Queen fears many things, Robert said. He glanced at Eddard, who was silent and as fixed as winter stone. Then back to the boy. Answer me as if there were no queen. Answer as if your mother held your ear and would twist it with each lie. My lady bade me, Lancel whispered. The words came as if they had been in his mouth for days, tasting like a coin he could not spit out. She told me the wine before the hunt should be special, to settle you, to bring you luck, to steady your humors. I did not know it would. I did not mean, I swear on all the... Enough, Robert said. The boy's voice was a string about to break. Did she speak of the hunt as if it were a matter already decided? She said boars are stubborn things and that it is best to meet stubbornness with patience, Lancel said miserably. I think she meant that the gods would take care of what was in their hands, if we saw to what was in ours. Robert nodded. He had expected no more and was somehow dulled by receiving it. He waved a hand. Lancel looked as if he had been offered his life and a lifetime of remembering it, and that frightened him more than a blade might have. Baratheon guided him back to his feet and to the door. Keep him, Eddard said unexpectedly, guarded but comfortable. If he disappears or is found in the bay, the Queen writes your story for you. If he sings more, we can decide later if we are to be moved by the tune. Selmy accepted the order as if it had been his own plan all along. As you wish, Lord Hand. He looked to the king. Robert nodded, and the Kingsguard went with his small, contained grace, taking the boy with him. Silence again. The night pressed its palm a little harder against the windows. "She had me softened," Robert said, almost conversationally. "She did not place the tusk in the boar's mouth, nor the boar in the forest. She merely put water where I would step and then was surprised to see me slip." He was surprised at the lack of heat in himself. He waited for rage. It did not come. Only something akin to resignation, but not soft. Something like a stone that had learned how to be itself by enduring weather. "Cersei will not be surprised by anything we do next, but that will not stop her from calling it shocking." "We should move before dawn," Eddard said, "before the city has time to whisper itself into a fever. The gold cloaks will be turning shifts. Littlefinger will be counting. Varys will be listening. All of them are better at those tasks in the morning than at night. Our advantage is the time between." Robert tilted his head, acknowledging a battle tactic he would have preferred be described in terms of horses and mud. "What of Stannis?" he asked, almost to himself. "He will demand blood and law in that order. Renly will demand a smile and a song and then produce a knife when the smile is broader than the song is long. I have brothers who differ like sun and shade. Both give me headaches." "Stannis will be needed," Eddard said, careful. "He will not be loved, but love is a poor plow in tight ground. Renly has charm enough to feed a city for a week, and it will run out in a famine. If you call them both, they will answer, and their presence will force others to reveal their loyalties, if only to oppose each other. But do not call them until you hold the city under your hand. They are storms in human shape, and you do not open your gates to a storm until your walls are patched." Robert laughed, and the laugh made his wound complain in a small, insistent voice. He ignored it. "You have a way of making war sound like the mending of socks." "I have mended what was under my care," Eddard said. "The method is similar. Count, plan, pull tight, and do not show what you are doing to those who will only pick at it. You can win a war in the open. You secure it with the quiet work afterwards. The trouble is men tire of quiet." "Men like me," Robert said, unoffended. He sighed and stared at the painted stars above. "I wanted a simple story in which I was the hammer. I hit a thing and the thing broke, and the world thanked me and then left me in peace with my ale. Instead, everything I hit seems to grow heads out of the break." "It is still a story in which you choose," Eddard said. "Choose to live, choose to rule, choose the way of doing it that spares the many, or as many as can be spared." "I will live," Robert said, and some muscle that had been clenched unclenched. He had not said the words before. He had only assumed them and then been surprised when the assumption seemed a child's toy in a real fire. Saying them made them real. He closed his eyes and let his head sink back. "We will move before dawn. We will pull the Queen's claws while smiling at the Queen. We will put my children, no, the children, behind walls that are mine. We will hold the gates. We will fetch Stannis once we hold the city's neck gently in our hand. Not so tight it breaks, not so loose it bites." Eddard inclined his head. "I will rouse the men I trust. I will bring the watch commander to heel or dismiss him if he attempts to buy time with promises. I will see that Varys hears a story that makes him want to be on the side that continues to feed his birds. As for Littlefinger, I will show him his reflection and let him smile at it until it talks." Robert huffed. "You never liked him." "I like him just enough to know his worth," Eddard said. "He keeps accounts like a man counting not only coins but breaths. That sort can be made to hold their own ledgers against the light." "And Cersei?" Robert asked. The question was not political or strategic now. It was personal and came from somewhere deep in the well that had been his life with her. He did not want his face to be read, but he allowed Eddard it, as he allowed him certain truths. "She will fight," Eddard said. "She has never believed the world is allowed to say no to her without consequences. She will gather her family and her friends. She will posture as a wronged wife and a mother. She will be those things and use the truth of them as a shield and a spear." "I can't kill a mother and call myself a man," Robert said. "I can kill her lover, though, and sleep at last." He heard the extraordinary weariness in his own voice and shook his head. No, not yet. If a head must fall, it will fall after the city is quiet. And if it is to be Jaime's... He stopped, mouth tightening. He had always hated the way the man carried himself, the infallibility, the clean cruelty of a perfect blade that never missed its own reflection. But he had also felt, in some ruined part of himself, a recognition. Here was a man who had been told since birth that he was the most beautiful instrument in a room, and then the room had asked him to play only one note forever. If it is to be Jaime's, it will be by law, not by drunken ambush. Eddard looked relieved at that, and Robert did not examine why it pleased him to see his friend relieved. He closed his eyes and allowed the world to settle into place with this plan in it. He had once thought himself a man who lived on battlefields. He had not understood how a bed could be a battlefield if a king lay in it thinking about the weight of children and gates. The door creaked and admitted Varys as if the room had summoned him from its own shadows. He was as soft as ever, his robes whispering, his hands folded like a prayer learned from a different god, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. "Your Grace," he breathed, Lord Hand. "I do hope I am not inopportune." "You are always inopportune," Robert said without opening his eyes. "And always timely. How do you do both at once?" "It is my calling," Varys said, bowing. He let his gaze slide over the room and drink in the details as thoroughly as a thief might count exits. The city is a creature asleep with one eye open. Men pass coin from hand to hand as if it were bread. The night guard dreams of day. The day men dream of breakfast. The queen's rooms are awake. The queen's brother paces like a caged cat. The little one is not in the city. "Which little one?" Robert asked, opening his eyes. "Her other brother," Varys said delicately. "He is in the Riverlands with a sellsword and a pretty horse. He is uncontainable by nature, but not present. That may be a blessing or an absence that stings later." "I prefer my pests where I can see them," Robert said. "Tell me this, Varys. If I say the city will move quietly before dawn, will it do so?" Varys considered. It was not theatrics. It was his profession to consider visibly so his listeners would respect the time it took. "Yes, if you make sure to give it something to talk about that is untrue." "We do not have time for riddles," Eddard said. "Every truth in this city wears a riddle as a cloak," Varys murmured. "Whisper that the king has taken a sudden fever and wants only silence and incense. The devout will pour into the great September. The gossips will run to the silent sisters to peer. Both groups leave the Red Keep's halls a little emptier while you do your work. Spread a second flavor to the rumor that the king, in his piety, will take confession at dawn. Priests are a kind of rope. Hand them to your enemies and they will bind themselves trying to pull you one way or another." Robert looked at Eddard and raised his brows. "I told you he's timely." "Do it," Eddard said to Varys. The eunuch smiled as if he had won some small game of cups. "It would be my joy to oblige. I will also suggest to the watch that a certain warehouse by the Mudgate will require guarding against imaginary thieves. The bulk of the men will end in the wrong place with the right orders, leaving you fewer to coax. Your joy is a bouquet of small betrayals," Robert said, though without heat. "We'll water it." Varys bowed again and made his exit soundless. When the door closed, Eddard looked at Robert and found his friend's face seemed older not by days but by a comprehension that had made a home behind his eyes. "You should rest for a little," he said, "if only to make your hands steady when you sign what you must." "Hands steady, heart steadier," Robert said. "Before you go, Eddard, answer me this with the honesty you might reserve for your own sons. Am I a good man who is bad at being king, or a bad king who is not a good man?" Eddard did not move for a count of several heartbeats. "You are a man who knew how to win and did not learn how to tend. You are no worse than many and better than more than you think. You have been ill-served by those who learned your appetites and taught them tricks. Be a man, and I will make something of that in the kingdom." Robert snorted. "There's your north, always giving me the harvest lesson." He let a small smile soften the corners of his mouth. "Go. I will not besmirch your stern love by dying while you are away. Eddard allowed himself the briefest, rarest of smiles in return, then left to set the machine's unseen gears turning. Alone again, Robert stared at the painted stars until they lost their edges and the ceiling became the night sky over Storm's End in his boyhood, where he had lain on a roof with a skin of ale and named constellations with Renly, pretending each star was a coin they could spend on the futures they drew in the air with their fingers. He remembered imagining himself immortal simply because he could not imagine otherwise. He breathed, and the breath ached, and he counted the ache like proof. Outside the chamber, the castle had begun to change its posture. Runners, their sandals soft, moved in specified blur between rooms. Some fires were stirred brighter while others were pinched out. Sentries were relayed not because they were sleepy, but because the new faces would be less likely to glance twice at shadows behaving like men. The larder doors were checked. The kitchens set water to boil. None of this was unusual, and if anyone were to ask, it could all be explained by the fact that a great palace was a creature too large to truly sleep. Yet the pattern had a new pulse hidden within it, like a drum covered by rain. In another wing, Cersei Lannister sat before a mirror as if it were a person and told it what she wanted it to hear. She had loosened her hair until it fell like fresh-spun gold across her shoulders. The mirror gave back what it had been trained to give since she was a girl, a face that confirmed something she had always believed, that fortune was a thing you could make hold still if you were beautiful enough and angry enough at the idea of losing it. She touched a small pot of salve to the corner of her mouth and pressed her lips together to make the blood rise prettily. Her maid stood aside, motionless and intent. "The king is awake," the maid murmured, the words delivered without tone, like coins laid down without boasting of their number. Cersei's mouth stilled. She met her own eyes and watched them sharpen. "Is he? Maester Pycelle says he is stronger than expected," the girl said. "The hand is with him. Ser Barristan has fetched your cousin." Cersei breathed a quiet laugh that did not reach the back of her throat. "Of course he has. The old knight loves his little rituals. He will ask for truth and the boy will give him whatever shape of it he can imagine. They will look at each other and believe themselves to be honorable." "Shall I send for Ser Jaime?" the maid asked. Cersei let her fingers linger on her own face, as if testing whether the shape of her features might move to suit some new plan. "No, the sight of him calms me. I would be calm in front of enemies. It puts them at ease. But not yet. Let him pace and sharpen himself. Send instead for Lord Baelish. Little finger." The maid was careful to show no distaste and accidentally showed just enough for Cersei to see and file away for later. "He keeps the books that count their breaths," Cersei said. "Varys will be counting hearts, and the hand will be counting debts of honor. I want a man who knows the weight of gold to tell me how much a gate costs, and how much a man who holds a gate has been paid and by whom. We'll see if we can purchase one small war inside a larger one." When Littlefinger came, he came slow, as if he had been walking behind himself and had to wait for his own last flourish to catch up. He smiled and bent his head and pretended to be outraged by her beauty. Cersei let him do all of his tricks and then waved her hand, as if warding off midges. "The king is awake," she said. "He will move before dawn. Men like him always prefer the morning to find the work done. Tell me what it costs me to have the watch forget which way the gates open." "My queen wounds me," Littlefinger said, and contrived to look charmed by the wound. "She speaks as if the watch had not already forgotten several things for the crown." "They remember too much of late," Cersei said. "I require more forgetting." Littlefinger's eyes did a precise flicker. "Far be it from me to speak of the character of men, but the commander of the watch is a man who learned to count by touching the skin of the money he collected. If someone has been touching him with heavier hands, he may blush at lighter ones. But coin is not memory by itself. Coin requires a witness. I will find you the right witnesses." "You will do more than find," Cersei said. "You will place. You will tell them where to stand when the king tries to move. You will tell them how to look surprised when things happen and where to look when they need to decide which surprise to prefer." Littlefinger smiled his thin smile and made it affectionate. Your grace has so much poetry in her. I am moved. I am not in a mood to be flattered, she said. Buy me enough time to wrap my children in armor they cannot see. If he reaches for them, I will make the city howl. You are the city, Littlefinger murmured, and Cersei did not argue because the mirror agreed with him. In the White Sword Tower, Jaime Lannister walked in circles around a table that had a map of the city on it, each street like a vein on a pale hand. He tapped the hilt of his sword with 2 fingers as if to coax a note from it. He had removed his breastplate and the white cloak pooled on a chair like a spilled cloud. He kept seeing, with the unbidden repetition of an irritating song, Robert's broad face and messy amusement, Robert's thick hands, Robert's fondness for large emotions. He had never liked the man, partly because he had the lazy arrogance of youth that insisted all men who were not him were a little bit uglier. But he had also never been able to dismiss him entirely. Robert could be vulgar, but his vulgarity had a generosity Jaime's father would call cheap, and that very cheapness made it honest in a way that needled. If the king lived, things became complicated. If the king died, things became simple in a certain way that had always made Jaime restless. He had learned that he did not love simplicity unless his sword had made it. He distrusted quiets that were bought in rooms where he wasn't present. He stopped and looked out the narrow window toward the dark of the bay, where lanterns on ships made a constellation that reminded him of the pattern on the ceiling in the king's chamber. He snorted, amused at the world's cheek. He turned when a knock announced a brother of the Kingsguard who was not truly his brother. Ser Aerys Oakhart slipped in and looked as earnest as a boy sworn too young. Your pardon, Ser Jaime. The Queen asks that you remain within call. I had intended to ride a horse through the halls before dawn, Jaime said. I suppose I shall stable it now. Oakhart frowned. Humor landed on him and bounced back without a mark. There are watch rotations. Ser Barristan has been about. The hand went to the king and left looking as if he were preparing to bind a wound on the city. Then he has work enough to fill both hands, Jaime said. Tell her grace I will be at the window looking like the sort of man who goes to windows when no one is permitted to sleep. He waited until Oakhart left and then laughed quietly to himself. The city under his feet seemed to flex and settle, like a cat deciding whether to pounce. In the Street of Steel, where the night lived longer because men kept it alive with sparks, a smith hammered out the spit of a hinge for a gate in a mansion that would change hands within the week. He lifted the iron to examine the temper and grunted, satisfied or too tired to care. His apprentice wiped his nose on the back of his hand and stared at the flame. Neither knew that men in palaces were counting them as part of sums that felt as cold as the coins they made hot by passing from palm to palm. All of this would have made a thoughtful song if anyone had had time to listen and stand still at a window. Instead, there were only the small choices that make the big ones. When Eddard Stark returned, he brought with him the scent of clean linen and a flurry of the orderly wakefulness that attaches itself to a man when he has set tasks in motion. He sat at the king's bedside and laid a parchment between them. I will need your hand on this, he said plainly. It makes plain that you authorize me to act on your behalf in matters of the city until such time as you rise. Robert looked at the blank space where his name would make the words true. I will sign and then you will use this to break furniture, he said, but without grudge. He took the quill and tested it in the candlelight, then bent to sign, hand steady enough. The name looked to him like a familiar animal that had grown a little older while he slept, a faithful dog with more gray. We will start with the children, Eddard said. Robert nodded. Ser Barristan will accompany them. No one will call it kidnapping if the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard holds the door. He will say he is doing his duty, and he will be right. The Queen will hate us for using honor to hold her. Honor holds better than rope if you attach it to the right men, Robert said, and he smiled lopsidedly at his own theft of Eddard's tone. He felt suddenly, absurdly, like the younger man he had been when he and Ned had lain side by side under a second-hand shield and counted their bruises as proof of life. And when she comes to spit in your face, I will wipe it away, Eddard said mildly, and then give her a cloth for her own dignity, and then I will take away her friends by making them useful elsewhere. The wind worried the shutter, and a thread of cool air touched Robert's damp forehead. He had not noticed he was sweating. He let the sweat be. The moment felt curiously pure. He had been at feasts where the noise and the light had seemed to make a fort around him, all the better to be alone inside it. Now, in this quiet chamber, with only a fire, a friend, and a plan, he felt accompanied by something he hadn't met in years. Purpose that didn't need drink to make itself brave. When Baratheon returned again, he had an expression that had learned, in a long life, to look composed and at the same time reveal a small crease of concern for those who knew how to look. "The Queen's apartments are awake," he said. "Her women move with parcels. She expects motions against her." "Good," Eddard said. "We will not disappoint her." "She will not go quietly," Selmy said. "She won't need to go," Robert answered. "Not tonight, but she will watch her children leave under my orders. She can do so with her head high or with tears. It will not change the leaving." Selmy bowed acknowledgement. "Tommen is asleep." "Wake him," Eddard said. "Wake them both. Children who are surprised by moves in the dark learn fear rather than prudence. Tell them their king commands an early morning treat of sweet cakes in a different room, and that they will spend the day with you learning names of knights and prayers for kings. They will love you for a week and then resent you for a year. That is the shape of care when it moves faster than explanation." Robert listened to a memory of Renly's laughter and then to Stannis' silence. A rich pairing. He sat up slightly and felt something stab him and refused to groan aloud. "I will see them before they go," he said, surprising himself. "I will not have a story told later that I didn't want to look at what I protected." "Very well," Eddard said quietly. The room reshaped itself to accommodate the new plan. Servants came and went with the noiseless industry of bees in a hive that knows winter is near. The air took on the smell of fresh water and the faint citrus of some imported oil that would touch the children's hair. Baratheon disappeared and returned with two sleepy figures in nightshirts, blinking and sunbright in the candlelight, though the sky outside still lay in ink. His white cloak gathered them like a careful sail. Tommen rubbed his eyes with chubby fists and peered at the big man in the bed. "Your Grace," he said, prompted not by anyone but by habit. Myrcella stood straighter, not more awake, but more determined to simulate awakeness better. She dipped a curtsy whose economy would have shamed half the ladies of court. Her hair fell in a soft spill, and she had her mother's face without the sharpened instruments in the eyes. Robert felt something twist inside him. It was neither longing nor regret exactly, but a cousin to both. He held out a huge hand. "Come here, little lions," he said gently. Both of them looked to Baratheon, who nodded as if it were a training exercise, and then went to the bedside. Tommen came more readily, crawling like a small bear up the side and plopping himself on the mattress with an honesty that made Robert bark a laugh that he had to cut into a smile. Myrcella stood by his hand and slipped her own into it shyly, as if testing whether it would close around hers or be too much. He closed it softly. He looked at their faces as if he were memorizing them, because he was. "You will go to learn from Ser Barristan today," he said, and his voice was the voice he used with dogs and with frightened lads sent to him when they had broken a rule and expected a hammer. "He will teach you how to stand and how to say no and how to walk into a room and know where the doors lead. He is the best man in this castle at those things. If he had been taught how to laugh properly, he would be perfect." Myrcella smiled despite the hour. Tommen looked solemn and nodded as if committing all of this to some oath. "You will return to your mother tonight," Robert continued. He stressed the word in a way that was meant to be kind, and he saw Myrcella hear the kindness in it. "You will tell her the sweets were too sweet and the lessons were too hard and that I am the worst uncle in a story. You may even practice your best pouts. But you will go with him now because I say so." He squeezed Myrcella's hand and ruffled Tommen's hair. "And because he is very boring if he is kept waiting." "Ser Barristan is never boring," Tommen said stoutly, and Barristan's lips twitched. Myrcella looked up at the king, eyes large and lucid. "Will you be better soon?" she asked. "I am better now," Robert said, surprised him that he meant it. "Go." Return champions. He glanced at Selmy. Teach them the names of all the dogs in the kennels and the names of the men who clean the kennels. Teach them which of those names will save their lives. Selmy bowed as if this had been what he intended all along. He led them out, white cloak trailing like a promise that could be kept. When they were gone, the room seemed larger and emptier. Robert breathed and let out a sound he did not dignify with a name. Eddard stood with his hands at his sides, the way men stand when they attend to the last sound inside a church before the doors close. Now the gates, Eddard said. Now the letters. He looked at Robert and saw a man who had decided something that might take the rest of his life to perform and might not have enough time and would do it anyway. I will return before dawn. He left, and the chamber returned to its breathing. The brazier ticked softly as a coal collapsed into itself and settled deeper, throwing up a brief shower of sparks that climbed and died. Robert lay back and stared at the painted stars until they were only paint, and the knowable fact of them comforted him more than the illusions of meaning he had once put on them. Outside, the sky began its lazy turn toward color, black dissolving to a tender blue, then gray, then the pale throat of morning. The city stirred in increments, as if it were stretching one limb at a time so as not to wake the dogs. Somewhere in the Red Keep, a door opened for a messenger and was closed again by a polite lie. Somewhere on the city wall, a watchman yawned in a way that made him feel both guilty and human. Somewhere in the royal apartments, Cersei dressed her children for a day she had not chosen and rehearsed how to make of it a wound she could show to men who would feel virtuous applying salt. Robert closed his eyes once more and did not sleep. He listened to his own breath and measured it. He thought of the war he had won and the peace he had not. He thought of his friend moving like winter through the castle. He thought of the morning, and how mornings had always promised something he had interpreted as forgiveness and then spent like coin before noon. A raven croaked in the court below, a blunt, practical sound. Then another answered. In a little while, others would lift together and sew the sky with black stitches that carried words. The king breathed. He felt the ache and welcomed it as a door kept open. The hour crept, and with it came the first hard rays of daylight like spears thrown from a distance, striking the floorboards in clean bars. Footsteps approached again, Eddard's measured and sure. He came not alone but with a shadow of men behind him who would peel away as needed, as if he were a ship trailing its boats. He knelt. Not because he needed to but because the balance of their old friendship allowed for gestures without audience, and he would stand straighter in a moment with the weight of the city on his shoulders. It begins, he said, and Robert nodded. It does, the king answered, his voice stronger now, anchored by what he had seen and decided. He pushed himself up a little in the bed, refused the pain it screamed, and set his face toward the day. He was not the man he had been, and that was not entirely a loss. The room smelled of smoke and oils and something like clean wool. The boar's hide hung as if listening. He held his breath for a heartbeat. Then he let it out, and with it, the last of the night's soft mercies. The world was a machine waiting for a hand to pull the lever. He would be that hand. The sun nudged the sill and spilled into the chamber. Somewhere far beyond, the bells of the great September began to talk about piety, the way bells always did, and men in the streets lifted their heads as if they could catch what the sound was selling. Within the fortress, in rooms and corridors only he and a handful knew, the sovereign will unfurled itself like a banner in a wind that had not yet arrived. The first hour marked itself not with a proclamation but with movements easily mistaken for chores. Doors unlocked, pen nibs sharpened, cups of water drawn, boots pulled on, laces tied, a king lifting himself 2 inches higher on his pillows and then not slipping back. And in that quiet, in that gathering of threads, the decision became itself. To live, to act, to hold, to wait, to make war not as a boy makes war with noise and a new horse, but as a man makes war with patience and a ledger of costs he reads without blinking. The day would ask its questions in due time. For now, Robert Baratheon listened to the city inhale, and then he answered, and the answer was his. The city's breath lengthened as the light grew. Eddard stood in the doorway until the habit of making certain all the hinges were present let him move. He had his walking stick with him now, though he had left it behind in the night as if ignoring the leg would render it less true. The ache had woken and set like a dull tooth through the muscles of his thigh with each flight of steps, but the work had given him back the focus that made pain stand to the side like a child told to wait. He set the parchment with Robert's name in his breast and went first to the Tower of the Hand where his household men, already roused, stood in a quiet readiness that had nothing of parade in it. Boots pulled on, belts buckled, faces washed in cold water. Jory Castle's nephew was there in Jory's place, a square-faced lad who carried his grief like a purse he would not show and would never misplace. He nodded when Eddard told him the names of the men to place at the Ravencoats and the orders to be given. He did not blink when Eddard added that any raven meant for Casterly Rock or Lannisport was to be delayed, read, and then sent in company with a twin bearing different words. Bran had once asked Eddard why ravens were black when winter was white. He had answered without thinking that messages near power must always be dressed to disappear. He thought of that now as he moved his men toward the rookery, and of Maester Luwin's careful hands, and then of Pycelle's, which were careful in a different way, careful of their own shake. At the steps up to the Maester's tower, he met Varys coming down, already smelling faintly of incense and the tallow smoke of 100 candles. The eunuch's round face carried the look of a man who had eaten something he had not wanted and now was proud of his manners for keeping it down. "The Silent Sisters have opened their doors to additional prayer," he observed, like a man remarking that a baker's shed kept a second fire for biscuits. "The rumor is obedient." The watch shifted a quarter of its men out toward the mud gate. "It is my great joy to report that there is now a sign there which says in a very official hand, by order of the king, 'No thieves today.'" Eddard snorted once in a way that was not a laugh and made the leg remind him that laughter was a luxury. "The ravens, already frightened by men moving quietly near their cages," Varys murmured. "The master will be relieved to see you relieve him of his burdens." They climbed. Pycelle met them with a show of bustle that did not hide the slow thinking behind the bustle. His gown was askew. His chain lay a little crooked, as if he had dressed himself by speaking to an audience of students not present and forgot that pins and buttons had no respect for his rhetoric. "My Lord Hand," he puffed. Your presence is itself a tonic to operations that, while humble, are vital." "I will trouble you for the keys to the Ravencoats," Eddard said, because he had learned long ago that if you wanted a man like this to hand you something you must name the thing. "Under the king's seal I am to review and direct the sending of messages." Pycelle hesitated as a man hesitates not because he doubts permission but because he resents the loss of the small kingdom built of his keys. Eddard presented the parchment. The old man read Robert's name, and the recognition did what orders sometimes could not. The chain around his neck shifted with the deep breath he took, and he handed over the ring of iron keys that clinked pleasantly in the hand. "Of course," he murmured, and then, because he could not help himself, he added, "I do hope this is but a prudence, and that there is no cause for alarm. The Queen has inquired whether the king might accept a visit later in the morning, as a show of harmony." "The Queen may inquire directly of the king's guards," Eddard said. He kept his voice even. "For now I will see to the messages. I would be grateful if you would ensure that your acolytes take a holiday from hurrying." Pycelle blinked. Varys smiled in that careful way he had, as if he were not so much amused as admiring of someone else's amusement. Eddard let the moment stand, and then he moved. He put men he trusted, Northmen who had learned to hold their tongues in winters that would have stolen those tongues had they been foolish, at the doors and the stairs. He looked over the perches where birds shifted and clucked and watched with bright, ancient eyes that had watched more kings than any living courtier had breathed. He read 3 messages meant for the rock and 4 meant for reasonable destinations that would have served as convenient relays. A daughter wailing for cloth and a brother for coin, letters in different hands that smelled of the same urgency. He set them aside, penned quick notes in a blunt, clear hand. "The king commands that you remain in your place until his word. The hand assures you that no harm is intended to your property if you obey," and slipped his words into the same skins as the originals after a copy had been made. Varys watched, interested. "There is a kind of poetry to answering a question that has not yet been asked," he murmured. "I have raised daughters," Eddard said, "and sons." He nodded to a man who would carry the first of the altered ravens to a perch. You hear the question before it is put if you pay attention. When he left the maester's tower, the light had lifted a little more, and with the light came a different sound, the great whisper of servants beginning tasks loudly enough to justify their presence but not so loudly as to be accused of making noise. He moved through it with the stick clicking its little tattoo on the stone, down to the barracks where the watch commander kept an office that tried very hard to be a room for a man with an office. It had a chair that looked like a throne to its owner and like a stool to any lord. It had a map of the city hung crooked but corrected often by a hand that had meant well and given up. It had a small safe in the corner that had a slick, clean look to its lock. Janos Slint stood when Eddard entered. He had a chest like a barrel and arms that had once been used to lift heavier weights than a quill. His face always seemed moments away from a smile and never found it. He had a talent for letting his lower lip mull words before they left it, which made men think him slow who did not know him. He was not slow. He was deliberate in his hungers. "My lord hand," he said, with a touch of that little bob that men show to sovereign people when they do not want to trouble their knees. "You grace the watch. The king commands that the gates shall answer to his hand today," Eddard said, and set Robert's seal on Slint's table. "No one in or out without a note that bears this hand and this mark. You will divide your men as I direct. Half at the Red Keep and its gates to keep order. The other half you will scatter along the city walls in positions you will learn in a moment from my men. You will take no orders from any but me or from Ser Barristan so long as the king's chamber is under the leech and salve." Slint read the writing and grunted approval the way a man grunts at a pig he is thinking of buying. Not lovingly, not rudely. He scratched his cheek. "There's talk about the king," he observed, as if he were speaking of fish whether rather than a man, "and of the queen, and of the royal children going to whisper their prayers." "Talk is the city's second coin," Eddard said. "Spend it carefully. You will be paid properly for the duties you perform. The king does not forget those who carry his name with clean hands." Slint's eyes flicked to the safe. Eddard let them flick. Then he put his own hand flat on the table so the man could see the scar that ran across the back of it like a frozen river, rough and white. "I will tell you this once, plainly. I will not bid for your loyalty with better coin than you have already accepted from other men. I will instead hold you to the oath you swore, which will double in weight with this seal upon it. If you cannot bear that weight, tell me now, and I will relieve you of the oath and the office together." Janos Slint stared up at him, and in his quick, animal glance Eddard saw the measure taken. The walking stick, the calm, the name on the parchment, the absence of humor, the lack of threat. Slint smiled then, in his way, which meant his mouth decided to show its teeth and his eyes stayed put. "Your lordship," he said, "has a way of putting matters a man can hold in his hands. The watch is at your word. We keep the peace. We are not lions. We do not bend to the rock for its own sake. We bend to coin and to command. You bring command. If there is coin with it, we will not call it a sin." Varys shifted, making a small silk sound. Eddard did not look at him. "There will be coin," he said, "but not as a leash, as wages earned, for work done. See to your men." When Slint had gone out, Varys inclined his head. "You make a very honest customer," he sighed. "Littlefinger will call it a flaw. I will call it terrifying, because it means men cannot measure you by their customary cups." "They will learn," Eddard said. He turned, and the stick tapped once on stone, a clear syllable in its way. "Tell me frankly, if Littlefinger has already paid Slint to remember certain names and forget certain others, will coin given by me make a second memory in the same man's head?" "In that man, yes," Varys said. "His memory is a bag. What is placed in it remains if you do not reach in later and take it out. Peter prefers purses he can empty at his leisure." "Then we will keep our hands clear," Eddard said. He moved because men learned by being shown repeatedly what mattered to the man they were learning. He moved as if the whole day were a field and his stick the furrow he made through it. In the queen's apartments, Myrcella and Tommen sat with small plates before them in a room made suddenly solemn by the presence of 7 white cloaks. The girl had found a ribbon and tied her hair back more tightly than her maid would have done. perhaps to show she had chosen something for herself in a day when little would be chosen by her. Tommen held a wooden horse by one ear and twisted it in his fingers. His mouth pressed itself together in an effort not to cry or yawn, and the effort made him beautiful in a way even his mother's mirror could not have managed. Cersei stood at the table's head in a gown of green that made her eyes the bright kind of poison. Jaime stood near a pillar, not too near and not too far, hands on his hips, comfortable and ready, the line of his shoulders as perfect as legend promised. Ser Barristan stood opposite him like a statue of the same size carved by a different sculptor, the purpose not aesthetic but moral. The air between those two men might have been a hallway with a closed door at the end of it. "You presume much," Cersei said softly, which was how she spoke when she did not intend to be refused. "You wake children in the night and take them from their mother's rooms and call it courtesy because you put small cakes before them. You stand with your cloak as if it were a document." "The king orders it," Barristan said. He did not emphasize the word that would have stung. He looked at the queen with an expression that a gentler world would have allowed a man of his age to wear more often. "You know me, your grace. You know what I fear. I fear failing a vow. I fear failing a child. There are many who call me old and say my sword cannot move as it once did. Let them. I will carry these children with my body if I must." Cersei's eyes went to Tommen and softened and then sharpened as if threatened by their own softness. She saw the way Myrcella kept her back very straight and loved her fiercely for that, and hated the men in this room for giving her daughter the chance to be brave. She turned to Jaime, not for permission. She had not asked him that since she was a girl, but for the comfort of witnessing a face that would always agree with her before it had fully heard her. Jaime's gaze was kind and amused and hard all at once. He didn't speak. "I will not scream and make a scene," Cersei said. She smiled. The smile was a scar put on a face. It pulled at the flesh that had been soft. "You love scenes, Ser Barristan. They are the stage where honor shows off its scars. But I will not give you one. Tell the king I came to see my children off to a lesson, and that I watched them go with dignity, and that I remembered to thank him for his care." "You may tell him yourself," Barristan said. "He will receive you later, when the hand permits visitors." Something in her, the part that had learned the danger of pushing too far not because anyone had convinced her she was wrong, but because she had observed the timing of disasters, acknowledged that. She knelt and kissed Myrcella on the forehead. Then Tommen, quick, as if she feared her lips might leave a line that a man would rub a thumb over and come away with evidence. "Do as you are told," she said. "Learn quickly." She rose and glanced at Barristan. "If they return with bruises, I will see that you have one too, old man." "Then I will have had 2 gifts in one morning," Barristan said, and his mouth almost smiled and did not. Jaime picked up Tommen's little horse and put it into the boy's hand in a way that made it feel like a sword and a scepter at once. He touched Myrcella's cheek with 2 fingers, the swiftest, most secretive of caresses. He looked at the white cloaks and sighed theatrically. "Don't teach them to be dull," he said. "Teach them to be alive." "That is the point," Barristan said, and the faintest breath of humor moved among them like a towel passed through the air to catch sweat. When they were gone, the room became a box again with pretty things in it and 2 lions left to prowl. Cersei went to the window and looked out without seeing, an old trick of hers that allowed her to arrange her face while pretending to be engaged with something beyond it. Jaime came and stood at her shoulder. "He lives," she said, almost idly. "He does," Jaime said. He watched the yard below where men crossed and waited like pieces in a game that disdained to name itself a game. "He will make a show of care, and the Northmen will make a show of law, and then they will put us in a small space and call it courtesy," she said. "They will summon father and think to threaten him with a court." She turned. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears. "They will try to push you where they can count you. They have forgotten that your oath is a cage, but one you have learned to rattle." Jaime lifted his brows with amused resignation. "My oath is the only honest thing about me some days," he said. "I can use it like a blade and draw nothing but astonishment." "Will you kill him?" she asked. It was not an order. It was a question she could only ask him and only hear. Which him? Jaime said. The fat one, the tall one, the old one, the quiet one, the one with a taste for whispers. If I begin, I will be asked to continue. He looked down at his hands. I have no appetite for killing a king in his bed while his friend holds his hand. I am not frightened of gods, you know that. I am bored by the men who think them useful, but I am not bored by the idea of my own life stretching beyond this morning. If I open my sword too soon, I shorten it. Cersei's mouth twisted. You sound like father. He would be flattered, Jaime said. He bumped her shoulder with his as if they were children again and he had been caught doing something clever and wanted her to smile. Wait, think, smile. That's your field of battle, sweet sister. Mine is still, occasionally, a yard with room for a swing. Don't step onto my ground and expect the dirt to behave. She glanced toward the door through which her youngest children had gone. He will use them, she said. He will draw out that old man's pity and wrap them in it and call it protection. There are men in that tower whose hearts have never been asked to do anything difficult. They will preen themselves on loving my children. They will obey their king, Jaime said, and the shape of the words was both simple and complicated in him. He sighed. If it comforts you, I'm as irritated by it as you are. Comfort is not the point, she said. Advantage is the point. If they hold Tommen and Myrcella, I hold Joffrey. I will not let them touch him. He will not go near the king until the world smells like roses and oil and formalities. He is the king's heir, no matter what lies their books tell them. Jaime's smile arrived and stayed a moment. You always did like the way crowns look in the air, he said. Very well. Keep the boy close. Keep the hound closer. I do, she said. She put a hand on Jaime's chest, lay it there, and then lowered it. Peter will come. Peter has already come, Jaime said, tilting his head toward a corner of the chamber where the faintest smell of mint suggested someone had been. And gone. He moves like a man who wants to be caught and never is. Good, she said. He will cross the hand's path while counting and improve the count for himself. If he cannot buy the watch, he will buy its captain's appetite. He will tell me which doors have new locks. If he is locked out, he will simply draw a window on the wall and call it a door, Jaime said. Let him. I will be at mine watching the yard. If you need me, scratch the wood. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or an acknowledgement of an old joke. When he left, she stood very still for a long time, not because stillness was natural to her, but because movement would have meant giving the room the show it desired, and she would not. In the Red Keep's laundry, Sansa Stark lifted a sleeve of her best gown and watched water bead on the silk before being swallowed. It seemed to her that the world had decided to change all at once, like a player in a silly little play who forgets to go out between scenes and brings the next scene on top of the first. Her maid had told her gently that she wasn't to go to the Queen's rooms that morning because the Queen had sent word of a private devotion. Sansa had nodded and then nodded again when she didn't need to, because nodding made her feel like she was agreeing with something sensible. She had dreamt of Joffrey riding up steps on a horse bred for his crown, golden and tall and clearly the hero of something. She had woken with her hand tucked under her pillow the way she had as a child when she imagined that the hand that held hers in sleep might be a dream's gift. Now she lifted the sleeve again and watched the water cling and then disappear and told herself that the Queen would send for her soon enough and that the prince would be waiting with a smile that was meant for her alone. She rehearsed the curtsy in her head, the opening of the eyes and the lowering of the chin and the softening of the mouth. She looked at the water and saw herself in it for an instant, bent by the surface, then gone when the laundress shook the tub. Arya was not in the laundry. Arya had been out in the narrow garden where dawn tasted of wet stone, and the cat with half an ear had decided she was an unthreatening piece of nonsense and ignored her with dignity. Syrio Farrell stood with a stick in his hand that had taught her more about swords than any sword had yet. He drew circles in the air with it and named them. Today the water sees, he said. Today you do not try to be a cat. You try to be the puddle the cat refuses to step in because it cannot see its bottom. You make your face quiet like the surface of a well. Then, ha! He flicked her shoulder with the stick so quickly she did not see it move. She bit off the little yelp and breathed instead. Sirio smiled and inclined his head at the breath. Good, little one. The world is full of men with long arms who want to touch your fear. You will have no fear they can touch. I'm not afraid, Arya said, which was often true and sometimes not. And the difference mattered less if she believed the first more strongly. Which is why you say it so loudly, Sirio said, amused. He looked up at the pale sky and then toward the bulk of the castle, his eyes narrowing on something beyond his sight. Today you will run after we finish this lesson, and you will run not because your feet are fast, but because your mind is faster. Your mind says, today is a day for being somewhere else. She stopped because he had never said that before, and she had learned that when he told her something was a day for something, she should take it with the same seriousness as a man takes weather. Somewhere else where? Near your father, Sirio said, and his eyes were far and close at once. The man with the stick can guess when a storm hides behind a hill. She nodded because she trusted him in the strange way she trusted certain stones on a path not to roll underfoot. She fell into the last pattern with him, the stepping and the opening like a door and the closing like a book, and then she ran, hair coming loose, the garden's hedge scratching as she brushed past. She found Eddard Stark at the corner where the corridor from the watch commander's office opened into the main gallery that led to the small council chamber. He stood with his hand on the head of his stick, speaking to Renly Baratheon, whose very presence brought the smell of cloves and an impatience like a flag in a steady wind. Renly smiled with his mouth and with his eyes and with the way his shoulders leaned in to make the conversation more intimate than it was. "Brother," he said when Robert's name was a necessary absence. "I've had men watching the Queen's apartments for a year now for signs of one thing or another, and I've never seen such a flurry of very well-dressed fear. She suspects everything." "She is not wrong to suspect," Eddard said, "but suspicion is not a sword. It is a scarf. It tangles if you pull on it too quickly." He saw Arya and his mouth softened, and then tightened slightly because he had to turn it back toward duty. "Lord Renly, I will need your help." Renly spread his hands, elegant and empty. "You always had it when it was entertaining. Now you have it when it is not, which is proof, I suppose, that I am maturing. What do you want?" "Your presence when we speak to the Queen," Eddard said. "Not as a brother to soften things, but as the master of laws whose reading of the law will make certain ears ache. If I speak of the king's authority, it will be called a northern man's vanity. If you speak of the code, it places iron under the velvet." Renly's smile turned wry. "You make me very boring," he said. "But yes, I am suited to be boring in public. I have brought my dear friend Ser Loras to stand at my back and make the boring pretty. Is that allowed?" "It is not a tourney," Eddard said, but the irony in it was more a friend's than a stern man's. Renly's expression changed for a heartbeat, a private weather passing. "She will try to make it a tourney," he murmured. "She prefers contests to conversations." He glanced down the hall where footsteps and the low murmur of courtiers signified the day putting on its court clothes. "She will want a room. She will want a show. She will want witnesses. If you give her a small room and few witnesses, she will bring her own in their heads. Better to give her a large room and your witnesses. Choose the stage yourself, my lord hand." "The small council chamber," Eddard said, "with the king sent for to be present as he is able." He looked at Arya. "Little one, go to your sister. Stay together. You will not wander today." Arya nodded. She did not roll her eyes because the leg made her father's gaze attentive, and she did not want to be the cause of pain. She ran. Renly watched her go with something like envy that he would have denied. "If we grow old," he said to Eddard, "let it be the kind that allows us to run when we should." He clapped a hand to the Stark's shoulder, lightly, because even Renly had learned a little care, and moved away with Loras falling into place like a bright thought. The small council chamber received its people as a theater receives the audience that thinks itself the play. Varys was in his seat like a soft spill of daylight. Baelish half reclined with a tiredness that suggested he had been up late counting and been forced to attend to something as dull as governance. Pycelle arranged his chain around his neck as if the act might calibrate the patience in the room. Renly toyed with a pear he did not intend to eat. Eddard arrived and did not sit until Robert had been brought. They did not carry the king. They permitted him to walk the length between the doors and a chair that had been made and placed for him with the quiet efficiency that attaches itself to real authority. He walked slower than any of them would have liked and straighter than any of them expected. He lowered himself into the chair with a grunt that he did not enlarge into a story. When he had sat, the room did a strange thing. It breathed out, and tension slipped from shoulders without men marking it. People who had imagined themselves sovereign in his absence felt a certain childhood return. "Good morning," Robert said, dry as a winter apple. "I've missed my little birds and my little counters." His eyes flicked across them and fixed for a shade longer on Baelish than was polite. Baelish gave him a little mock bow that could pass as charm. Robert's eyes passed to Renly, who lifted the pair in salute, and the smile that came then had some of the weight of a younger time in it. It moved on to Eddard, and the smile became something like consent. Cersei entered with the rustle of a pageant and the steadiness of a general who refuses the fancy of a drum. She wore her crown as if it had been designed to match the light falling on it. Joffrey came at her side, tall as ever for a boy his age, jaw set as if he had clenched his teeth in sleep and forgotten to unclench them. Behind and to the right came the Hound, his face its own mask that freed him from the need for any other. Behind and to the left came two Kingsguard, Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt, faces as blank as shields, hands as careful as servants. Jaime did not enter. Cersei did not look behind to see if he would. "My lord husband," she said, and the words grazed him as if they were knives wrapped in velvet. "I rejoice to see you on your feet. The Seven have smiled on us." "They must have mistaken me for another," Robert said. "I won't correct them. Sit." She sat, not on her usual chair, but in a position that moved her nearer to Joffrey's right hand than she had been in a month. She smiled to herself because sitting sometimes is a way to show standing. Joffrey did not sit immediately. He looked around as if expecting someone to catch the dropped cue. Robert watched this and did not help. Eventually the boy sat because his mother sat. The Hound stood with the patience of men who have learned that standing has saved more lives than drawing ever has. "We have business," Robert said. "First, the children. Tommen and Myrcella are with Ser Barristan. They will remain so for a time." Cersei's mouth opened, and Renly's eyes cut to her and then to the pair in his hand and then to Eddard. Baelish's eyelids lowered as if he were looking at something on the table. Varys's lips thinned. Joffrey's hands flexed, betrayed by their youth. "My children," Cersei began. "Are the kingdom's children," Robert said. "And mine." He said the last word with such care Eddard felt the room tilt and then right itself. "They are safer where they are than in a room where men who love them might mistake their love for wisdom. They will be returned to you before evening. You may write me notes to send with their lessons. I will throw them away unread if they tell Ser Barristan what to do." She smiled. It was a weapon in its scabbard. "I thank your grace for the reminder that he wears a cloak for our protection. I shall write him a poem about it." "You shall write him nothing," Robert said, and one of the guards behind Cersei shifted his foot and then made it still. "Second, the watch is under the hand's direction for the day. The gates will open and shut at his order. Third, ravens will not fly to the rock without my signature. Fourth, Ser Jaime will remain within his tower until called for. He may not go to the Queen's apartments without escort. Fifth, Lord Baelish." "Your Grace." Littlefinger's voice was smooth as a whetstone. "You will present your account books for review to the hand by midday," Robert said. "No more of your wheelbarrows of coin moving themselves. If you can trick my friend, you will have earned the trick." He lifted a hand before Baelish could do more than open his mouth to let a charming objection out. "Oh, and that little warehouse at the mud gate? I trust it is well guarded by now." Baelish spread his hands. "I must confess I do not know which warehouse His Majesty could possibly mean." "The only one worth guarding," Robert said, and Baelish permitted himself to look impressed and hurt. Cersei lifted her chin. "You list your comforts," she said. "You talk of gates and birds. The city does love a story with objects in it. But we are in a room where law is spoken as if it were a language. Speak to me of law, Lord Hand. Speak to me of fathers and sons and the order of succession, and how the gods frown on men who rearrange it to suit their northern winters. Eddard leaned forward and placed his hands on the table, not as if to steady himself, but as if to show them he might, if needed, pick the table up. "My lady," he said, "know your grace, not now." And the murmur that rose from the far wall where a handful of lords and singers had drifted in as if by accident stilled itself. "The law says that the king may assign custody for the safety of royal children during times of danger. The law says that the hand acts in the king's name when the king so directs. The law says the hand signature bears the weight of the king's voice for the duties named. The law says that men who refuse to answer lawful summons will come to court by other means, and that lords who ride against the king's peace will be called to answer. It says nothing of warehouses and very little of pairs. It speaks a great deal of oaths." Joffrey's chair scraped lightly as he shifted. "And it says what about heirs?" he demanded. His voice cracked and then pulled itself back to the line it wanted to walk. "It says what about who sits that chair when a king dies? It says nothing about hands stealing children and telling their mothers to be silent. It says," Renly cut in smoothly, "that the order of succession is clear and as dull as an old prayer when it applies. It says also that the queen's regency exists at the pleasure of the king and is not a thing that grows itself out of the fact of having borne issue. It says some other things that would make you yawn, nephew, and we will save you that pain." "My son will be king," Cersei said. She said it with such certainty that men who had not thought to consider loss felt something cold in their armpits. "If you put a knife on the crown, you will find your hand gone." "No one is talking of knives," Robert said, and it surprised him that the sadness in his voice was not a trick. "We are talking of rooms and of the people we place in them. Joffrey, you will remain with your mother when you are not with the Septon or your armsmaster. You will not go hunting today. I forbid it. You will not go to the yard with a sword. If you want to hit something, take a stick and hit a plank until it breaks. You will not call for Sansa Stark." He saw Cersei's eyes flicker at that and did not smile because it would have been cruel. "You will consider that your father has woken from a bad dream and would like not to face another this afternoon. You are not my—" Joffrey began, then stopped because some sliver of training, some cold finger pressing into his spine, told him he had made the error even if he had not completed it. He scowled, a small boy again for an instant. "I will do as you command," he said, and the words were convincing enough for a listener who wanted to be convinced. Robert looked at him a long moment. He felt no love for the boy. He felt some pity that tasted like iron. He turned away. "Lord Varys," he said, "have the ravens gone to Dragonstone?" "They are being fattened for the journey," Varys murmured. "Stannis Baratheon likes his letters lean, but not skeletal." "Tell him to come," Robert said. "Tell him to bring his ships and his law and his face that makes the sun feel guilty. Tell him we have work. Tell him I will stand beside him and hear him lecture me and not throw anything." He looked at Renly. "Send to Highgarden for whatever you want at the price you can bear. If your friend's Lord Father will answer with banners and bread, I will remember it when the ledger is tallied. But do not wring a harvest out of ground that has not promised one." Renly raised an invisible cup. "I know the song," he said. "I will play it quietly." He glanced at Baelish. "Peter will help, won't you, friend? He is so very good at asking a question 3 ways until even a proud man thinks he thought of the answer." "I live to serve," Littlefinger said, "and you could almost forget he often lived for other reasons if you were generous with your memory." Cersei stood. It was not the standing of someone who expects to be forbade. It was the standing of someone who knows standing is a kind of power. "This is all very charming," she said, "but play acting in chambers and sending men to measure doors will not change certain facts. You may summon my father. He will come, and he will bring with him more truth than your words can bear. He will bring with him men." She looked at Robert and let the smallest thread of something like vulnerability show. Not because she felt it, not now, but because she knew its value. "If you must treat me as an enemy, Robert, do it cleanly. Do not pretend to love my children with one hand while you cut their names with the other. It is an ugly hypocrisy for a man who once knew how to be clear. He met her gaze. He had looked into those green eyes on a dozen mornings and had seen a dozen different rooms reflected in them. He found no room there now. I do not pretend, he said. I choose to keep them alive in a city that eats. I choose to put you at a table instead of in a cell because I haven't yet decided whether mercy or fear is better for the city. I choose to call your brother in from his window and hold his sword in a hand he recognizes. I choose to keep the law near and the men who know how to wield it nearer. If you want me to be clear, if you move against my hand or against the watch in this, I will take it for attack and I will answer. You threaten so sweetly, she said, almost admiring. It almost makes me forgive you for not dying when it would have suited me. She turned. Come, Joff. Joffrey stood. He looked at the hound, and the hound did not move because the hound moved when men who paid him told him to do so, not when boys did. For a brief, awkward moment, several stories about power collided in the doorway like men at a fair. Then they sorted themselves. The queen walked, the prince walked, the hound walked. The white cloaks showed the appropriate amount of deference while proving to anyone who cared that they could be in the same room with a king and not trip over him. When they had gone, Robert leaned back and closed his eyes. I need wine, he said. Not to drown in, Eddard, just to float in, like a man who's forgotten how to swim. It makes the legs easier. Eddard nodded, and a servant moved with the quiet haste of someone who has learned that half speed and half speed together make full speed if executed without fuss. Robert sipped and then set it aside. He nearly said it, he murmured. You heard him. I heard him, Eddard said. Everyone heard him. Best that it was here, and not screamed in a yard. Varys steepled his fingers. A whisper in a great room is a confession without witnesses, he observed. Each man hears his own version and tells it to his own conscience. He looked at Robert as if he might guess the next move before it was named. May I be permitted to ask a practical question? Do you require permission at last? Robert asked. He rubbed the heel of his hand against his temple and grimaced, an old pain greeting a new one. Ask. When Ser Jaime is told to remain in his tower, who tells him? Varys said. Words have different effects depending on the mouth that speaks them and the floor they land upon. If a page tells him, he will make a jest of it and throw it out the window. If the Lord Commander tells him, he will receive it as he receives all sermons. If the king tells him, he will become a question. I will tell him, Robert said. Eddard lifted his brows. You will walk to the White Sword Tower today? I will not walk, Robert said. I will ride in a chair like a piece of furniture, and you will hate the look of it, Stark, and I will hate the feel of it. And we will do it because if I cannot go to a man's door and knock on it and tell him his king has a word, then I am already dead and we are playing with bones. He stood with care, stubbornness making a pillar under each arm. Renly stood as if moved by the same invisible lever. I will walk 2 steps behind you and smile as if my teeth are my weapons, he said. We will make the city believe in legend for 1 hour. Legend is cheap in a city that paints saints on its walls to hide cracks. Baelish murmured to Varys, and Varys's mouth moved in a way that suggested he found the sentiment pleasing and would go on enjoying it in private. They went, then, not in a parade but in that controlled spill that becomes a procession when the man in the middle is worth enough eyes. The sedan chair was brought and bore the king through the hall where the banners told of victories that had happened to other men and were now the property of Meals. Eddard walked at the chair's side, one hand on the wood not as if he needed to steady it but because he intended to. Renly's stride was a dance taught by habit. He bowed with his head and not with his spine to those who gathered. Loras was a bright coin flipping beside him. The hound, stationed by the queen at a crossroads he disliked, watched with eyes that did not blink more than simply function. They came to the White Sword Tower, and the white of it looked especially white in the clean morning light, as if someone had washed it during the night to make a point. Barristan was there already, because he could be nowhere else when the king came. The other brothers were summoned with a word that became an obligation as soon as it landed. Meryn Trant came with his mouth a little open as if always ready to catch falling favors. Boros Blunt came wiping grease from his fingers on a cloth he put in his sleeve. Ares Oakheart came looking almost hopeful, which was worrying in a man with so much chain on his chest. Preston Greenfield, quiet, precise, slid in like a blade back into its scabbard. Jamie arrived last because he always made it look like a choice. He looked at the chair and then at the man in it and let his grin be respectful. "Your Grace, Sir Jamie," Robert said. "You look as if you've slept." "I paced instead," Jamie said. "The floor and I are on easy terms." "Good," Robert said. "You will remain in these rooms until I call for you. You will not go to the Queen's chambers. You will not go down to the yard. You will not go to the city. You will read your book?" He nodded toward the white book, open on its stand, neat as a confession. "And you will enjoy the lack of interruption." Jamie looked over at the book and raised his brows in a parody of piety. "I have always enjoyed good reading," he said. "It is an underappreciated vice. May I ask the cause for my monastic day?" "You may ask," Robert said. "I will not answer. I will tell you only this. I would keep you from crossing certain paths in the next hours not because I fear you, but because I do not want you to make a choice you will think you have to live with for 20 years. For the first time that morning, Jamie's face became serious without being grim. He glanced past Robert at Eddard and then at Baratheon. "And if I prefer to go where I please?" "You will not," Baratheon said. And in that quiet there was a weight that Jamie respected enough to step aside from. "Do not make me a man who draws on a brother." Jamie's smile returned, smaller. "Very well," he said. "I will sit and read. I will write down my acts in my own mind and improve them in the telling." He lowered his head a fraction. "And I will not go to the Queen." "Thank you," Robert said. He meant it. He sat back and endured the motion of the chair being turned with a grimace that he did not develop into anecdote. He caught Jamie's eye. "I am not your enemy for the sake of being entertained," he said. "We will stand where we must. That is all." Back in the keep, the day gathered itself as a long bow gathers, slow and sure. The watch changed positions with an efficiency that would have made a more suspicious man than Eddard worry, because it was not his nature to assume malice when he saw competence. He simply noted it and put a man at each gate who would not sleep no matter the hour. The kitchens sent platters to rooms they did not usually feed, and certain corners of the castle where servants liked to linger discovered themselves abruptly swept. Ravencoats rustled with more than feathered life as missives left for places where the wind remembered mountains and men remembered old names. In the city below, the great September spells told their story of piety, and the story was received as a tale of mourning rather than an alarm. Littlefinger came to Eddard with a ledger tucked under his arm and a smile that suggested he was bearing a baby no one had expected. "I find myself in the rare position of having nothing to hide," he said, and Eddard took the book and set it down without returning the smile because he wished to leave the man room to create another. "You find yourself in the position of having been asked to share," Eddard said. He opened the ledger and read not as an accountant but as a man who knew how to read a map and write a letter that did not waste its ink. "There's a great deal of grain moving toward the city in the next fortnight. There's always a great deal of grain moving toward the city because the city likes to eat," Littlefinger said, "and to eat while not thinking about where bread comes from. I have found it soothing to think about it for them." Eddard turned a page. "These sums." "Ah," Baelish said, and leaned forward as if to comment on something delicious. "Yes, those sums. They make a sound when they are held up to the light. It sounds like a hand closing." "You've purchased Slint twice," Eddard said. He did not make it a question. "Thrice," Littlefinger said, pleased. "Once for myself, once for a friend who did not know he was my friend, and once for the possibility I would require a different friend next month. The city's loyalty is a nest of eggs. It is prudent to sit on several. Slint is mine today," Eddard said, "and when he next feels the warmth of a hand on him, it will be the king's." Littlefinger's smile did the thing it did when he found someone disappointingly literal and then found the disappointment amusing. "You make a virtue of being unfitted to the work most of us do, Lord Stark," he said. "It is a novelty. Confess I like it." I cannot imagine it winning you many games." "I do not play games," Eddard said. "Then you always win," Littlefinger returned, and his eyes were not mocking in that moment, which was more unnerving than any mockery. "I will place 2 men near Slint who like to be paid in favors and will owe me too. If he begins to sway because of a wind I did not order, they will signal. You see, I am not hiding anything from you. I am simply continuing to be myself." "You are very good at being yourself," Eddard said. He closed the ledger and set his palm upon it. "If my daughter becomes queen, I will not have her sit with a husband who never learned how to be a man because he learned how to be a prince. If she does not, I will take her home and feed her and find her work to do that keeps her from thinking of rooms like this. I tell you this not because I think you care for her happiness, but because I want you to understand the scale I am balancing. Your coins are real. My measure is not less real." Littlefinger bowed, shallow and precise. "And that is why," he said, "men like me are fond of men like you. I will keep your balance in mind while I do my little sums." He straightened. "There is to be a supper tonight for the ladies of the court, hosted by the queen. Do we allow them to gather? Do we allow their stories to breed in the same room?" "Let them," Eddard said. "When hens cluck together, the fox hears them as one noise and becomes confused." He looked at the man. "Thank you for your book." "It is not all my books," Littlefinger said, amused, and on that honest admission he withdrew, already considering the placement of his next 2 smiles. In the training yard, the sound of wood on would rang steady as the hour. Sandor Clegane watched a boy hit a post and corrected the angle of his arm with 2 fingers and no speech. Joffrey hit harder to prove he had heard what had not been said. The Hound watched him with the weary expertise of men who have been given the same tool and asked to build 2 different houses with it. When the sweat started and the breath came sharp, Joffrey paused and looked toward the tower where the king had gone and scowled. "He sits," he said. The words came out childish. He tried again, deeper. "He sits and he tells me not to move." "He sits because a boar put a hole in him," Sandor observed. "You move because no one's put a hole in you yet. The one doesn't make the other untrue." "He treats me like a child," Joffrey said. "You are a child," Sandor said. "If you want to be a man, be one. Not by saying it." Joffrey turned and lifted the stick and struck the plank until his hand stung. He hit and hit, and the pain taught him something his mother's words could not. He did not notice when Sansa came to the edge of the yard and watched and then left because she had learned that there are some doors you do not step through day after day if you wish the day to change. By mid-morning, the keep had entered the rhythm by which it pretends things have always been the way they are. Men standing in places they do not usually stand seemed natural. Guarded doors became decorations. The rumor about the king's confession transformed into a rumor about the king's piety. The rumor about the queen's anger became a rumor about her grace under insult. Varys walked inside it as a fish swims with its own river. He found Eddard again and stood with him by a narrow window that overlooked a sliver of the city where the Street of Flower became the Street of Sisters and both became a tangle of laundry lines. "Your ravens flew," he murmured. "Stannis will read a message that will cause him to look at a calendar, then at the sea, then at his sword. He will then come." "And Renly?" Eddard asked. "Below." A woman shook a rug and made a constellation of dust that was prettier than anything the Great September could put into the air. "Renly will write to Mace Tyrell asking him to think of summer," Varys said. "Mace Tyrell will think of feasts. He will send sons and bread. He will not send his full strength unless someone more beautiful than I asks him twice. Your friend has someone more beautiful than I asking at present. Then we will have bread and a few banners," Eddard said. "Bread before banners is an order I can endure. And the rock." Varys's voice did not change, but the feeling in it did, a degree colder, like a shadow when a cloud passes. "Do we starve it of words?" "We tell it this," Eddard said, and he spoke the message he had crafted that morning with the care of a man who knows the price of adjectives. "By order of the king, Lord Tywin Lannister is to present himself at King's Landing within a fortnight to answer for raids upon the Riverlands and to account for his men's behavior toward the small folk under the crown's peace. He will bring no more than 200 men with him. If he fails, he will be declared in rebellion and his lands placed under sequestration. He will be offered safe conduct to and from the city. He will be granted the courtesy due his station. He looked at Varys. You recognize the dance? I do, Varys said. You offer him a choice in which each step is on your floor. He will be offended by the floor. He will bring more than 200 if he comes. He may not come. If he does not, we will have the word we need to gather the words we want. Law is nothing if it is not used, Eddard said. The leg hurt. He leaned on the stick. I no longer wish to be as careful as I have been. You have that luxury for the hour, Varys said. When the hour is over, you will wish to be careful again. Robert received Cersei a second time by late morning because the shape of the day demanded a second act, and because sending her away entirely would have been a declaration he did not yet wish to make. She came alone, which was a trick. Coming alone always made the person you came to feel either magnified or insulted. He sat with his bandages changed and a clean tunic that smelled of rosemary. She sat across from him and did not touch the table between them, as if to acknowledge that it was a border. You are very brave, she said. You are very brave at last. And you are very beautiful as always, he said. The old language felt dull in his mouth, as if they had studied it in a classroom and found the words' meanings had been stolen by a boy with an ink-stained thumb. You are also very angry. I am also very tired, she said, and for the first time that morning he believed he heard something of truth beneath the weapons. You were a man who might have died and become easy. You have instead become a man who will make everything hard. I suppose I always knew it would be one of the two. Hard is not always the same as cruel, he said. No, she said, but you do not get to define that every time. I do now, he said with a weary attempt at humor. I am reminded hourly that I'm king. Be reminded, she said. While you are reminded, remember this. If you take my children's names, you take mine. I am no fool. I know what you are implying with your books and your looks. I know what your friend has counted. If you say those words aloud in a room where men who want to kill me can hear them and call it lawful, I will burn this city down around your ears and dance on the bones. I will sing while doing it, and I am not the only one who will find it music. I will not say them, he said. The admission felt like a release and a wound. Not because they are not true, because I will not use the children to hurt you and you will not use them to hurt me. We will fight over other things. We have plenty. We always have. She looked at him then in that way he had always found dangerous. Openly, as if she were not in a room that had seen kings and queens pretend not to look like they were dying. You were a man I could have loved, she said, and perhaps that was also true. If you had been a different man, if I had been permitted a different life. We were both commoners in our hearts, he said. It is a pity we were made into nobles and expected to like it. He grimaced, and then, because he could not resist, he added, if it helps your anger, know that somewhere there is a god coup, eeping score and laughing. I do not find God's amusement amusing, she said. She stood, the gown whispering about her as if it loved her. This city is not yours alone, Robert. It is mine too, and I am better at speaking its language. Then speak, he said. We will see who listens. He lifted his hand. Go. Your boy is in the yard making the post hurt. I hope it learns a lesson from him. She smiled without moving her mouth and left. When she was gone, Robert let his head fall back against the chair and shut his eyes. He listened to his breath. He thought of hammers and boars and brothers. He thought of Lyanna because he always would. He thought of Cersei's threat and found himself thinking not only of fire but of bread, of loaves thrown at men like stones and of men who would bite and be grateful. He did not know if that thought made him crueler or simply older. By noon the sun had settled into its ruling place and turned the stones of the keep into a low heat that made men feel like they were wrapped in a careful hand. The city below began its midday madman's bargain. Shouts and clatter and bargaining like a song sung by 1,000 throats without rehearsal. In the harbor, sails shifted to catch a wind that would bring 3 ships quicker and leave 2 behind. On the King's Road, Two gentlemen weavers debated whether to turn back or to go forward and found that both ways required courage they had spent on other days. In the Red Keep, letters flew and were caught. Certain doors remained closed. Certain faces became familiar to guards at posts they had not guarded yesterday. In the afternoon, a raven from the eyrie came, its feathers dulled by travel and its message brisk in Lisa Arryn's frightened hand. A complaint about the Lannisters, a refusal to attend court, a reminder that a son could not learn to be brave if he was ever asked to leave his mother's lap. Eddard read it with a heaviness that spread in him like cold water poured into a bowl. He put the letter aside and did not send a reply because there are some letters that cannot be answered without lying. A second raven came from Riverrun, Edmure Tully's neat script tight with anger and pride. He wrote that Gregor Clegane had burned 4 more villages past the Tumblestone and made off with cattle and girls, and that a party of 50 had ridden down a river road and not been seen since, and that the small folk had begun to hide in the ruins of an old tower that had once belonged to men who thought they could own water. He asked for orders. He did not ask for permission. Eddard wrote back, "Hold, gather. Do not ride out of your walls without my word. We will give you more swords, and then we will choose our hour." He added, because it seemed important to make something soft in the hard thing, "Tell my brother by marriage that I remember our table and that I will send him the knife's other edge soon." He sealed it with the dire wolf and rose more stiffly than he had sat. Renly brought Loras to the hand that laid hour like a prince bringing a jewel to a craftsman to cut. Loras bowed deeper than the last time he had bowed to Eddard, and Eddard acknowledged him with a slight inclination that felt like a good bargain. "My lord," Renly said, "we have 3 lords of middling consequence pledged to me to speak in your favor if words must be said in the long hall. They do not bring swords you can depend on. They bring mouths that will tell other mouths which way to open. One of them knows a song people like to hum." "I prefer swords," Eddard said, "but I will take mouths that sing in the right key." "Thank you." "We are not yet at swords," Renly said, "and I would like to keep it so for as long as I can. Because swords make messes, I am always the one appointed to clean while Stannis lectures. Let us proceed with our broom." Eddard nodded toward Loras. "Sire," he said, and Loras's face did the thing young men's faces sometimes do when an older, severe man gives them the respect of a title without irony. It opened like a window. "Lord Stark," Loras said, "if I can be of use, it will be my honor." "You can keep your eyes on the Queen's knights and tell me which of them are clever," Eddard said, "and which are only strong. The strong we can bear. The clever we will need to bind with their own cleverness." He looked down the corridor where the light made bars on the stones. "Tell me what you think of Jaime Lannister." Loras's mouth softened as if the question had a taste. "He is the best sword I have seen who makes it look as if he is not wearing one," he said. "He likes being looked at. He is very good at making you think you are the one doing the looking. He will not be baited by honor. He will be baited by boredom. If you wish to move him, put him in a place where he must either sit very still or look ridiculous. He will sit very still. He is vain in the way of men who have always been told that their beauty is useful to other people's problems." Eddard grunted in appreciation. "You see clearly," he said. "Go on seeing. Then come tell me what you have seen and not what you wish you had." Loras bowed again, glorying quietly in being useful. Renly put a hand on his shoulder, a touch that said what they could not say here, and they left, their colors brightening the long, dull stone like banners in windless weather. Toward evening, when shadows began to pull like long fabric and the keep's torches had not yet been lit, Barristan Selmy brought Tommen and Myrcella back to their mother. The children came on foot, not carried, and this dignity matters more than men remember. They had crumbs on their sleeves and a cleanliness in their eyes that suggested they had been praised for standing up and for asking a question they did not understand. Cersei received them with her head high and her hands steady. She did not make a scene. She kissed their foreheads and asked them, sweetly, in front of the white cloak, what they had learned. Tommen announced in solemn triumph that he knew the names of all the dogs in the kennels and the names of their handlers. Myrcella recited the names of 3 septons who had once been knights and 3 knights who had once been butchers' sons. Cersei's mouth curved because she could not help admiring the composition of the lesson even as she resented it. She thanked Selmy with the minimum of courtesy required by law and performed courtesy as a show. When he left, she sat with her children at her feet on pillows and told them a story about a lioness who had been asked to give her cubs to a shepherd to learn to be sheep and what the lioness had done. And in her story, all the sheep admired the lioness at the end and some of them wished to be lions. She told the story in such a way that the children laughed. And when Tommen asked if sheep ever ate lions, she ruffled his hair and told him that in stories, sheep sometimes ate wolves if the man telling the story needed a rest. Joffrey came late to that family's circle, sweating from practice and sullen and bright. He sat apart, as if he were a guest and a judge. He liked the way the White Cloak stood in the doorway. He liked the way his mother's eyes sought him before they softened for his sister and brother. He liked the way the hound stood with his weight on one foot and then the other, a man who could move quickly without seeming to move at all. He did not like the way the castle turned when he pushed it. He did not like being told no. He did not say so, because the day had taught him a little. Robert ate little that night and drank less than he wished and more than Eddard would have liked. When the lamps were lit and the keep became again the place where candles make shadows look as if they are listening, he sat in his chamber with only one candle burning, as if stinginess could be a new virtue. He held a sheet of paper in his hand that had received his scratching and blots. He looked at it and saw not the words, which were clean enough, but the shapes of the names. Stannis, Renly, Tywin, Stark, Lannister, Baratheon. Names are vessels men pour themselves into and then smash. He folded the paper and set it aside. Eddard came and stood in the doorway until Robert lifted his head. "We bought a day," he said. "We spent some old coins. We made some new enemies." "Enemies are cheap," Robert said. "Friends cost." He looked up. "Do you regret not telling me sooner? Would it have changed this day?" Eddard thought, because he had learned to do so and because the man before him deserved answers not made of habit. "No," he said at last. "I would have robbed you of a clarity that belongs to a man who has decided to live. If I had told you when you were warmer with wine and colder with pain, you would have done something that made you feel like yourself and left me with more bodies to put in the right soil. Today you did not mistake action for decision." "I am grateful," Robert grunted. "You are a farmer and a poet," he said. "One of those is useful, and the other gives you a way to make the useful bearable." He rubbed his face. "Stannis will ride. He will storm through the doors and tell me that I am late to my own duty. He will be right. Renly will bring bread and a flower and a song and a sword that dances at the right moments. He will be wrong often and useful often and a nuisance always. The Queen will smile while ordering rooms moved inside rooms. Jaime will play his game in his tower and come down when the hour suits him. Tywin will... What will he do, Eddard?" "He will look at the map," Eddard said. "And he will put his finger on the places where the roads meet, and he will send men to those places. He will not come alone, and he may not come at all. If he does not, we have this 50 years' worth of law and an old chair to sit in while we read it aloud until the men who are tired of hearing our words mount their horses and ride for us. If he does, we will smile and pour wine and ask him to join us in counting. He does not like to be counted by other men." Robert laughed then, a dry, genuine sound that had less mirth than respect in it. "No, he does not." He lifted the cup and drank and set it back. "Very well, we have made our choice. Tomorrow we will make it again." He looked at his friend. "Do not let them bring me too much wine tonight. I will sit on your chest if I must, your grace," Eddard said, and the familiar answer made them both feel an ease that sleep could not. He turned to go and then paused. "There is something else. Sansa asked to see the Queen. She was told no. She is a girl who has been told no rarely, and she is very good at making a no sound like an insult." Robert smiled without opening his eyes. "She will learn," he said. "Teach her to hear no and not mistake it for a man's dislike. It is often simply a wall." "I have walls enough to teach with," Eddard said. He left, taking with him the sound of the king's breathing slower, steadier now, as if the day had given it a metronome. Night came down the way a careful cloak is laid over a sleeping body, smoothing the corners, tucking in the edges. In the tent outside the walls where men of the watch dozed to a bench, a rat chewed on a dry crust and found it good. In the Street of Silk, a woman laughed in the right key to make men think their own jokes had improved. In the White Sword Tower, Jaime Lannister read his page in the White Book and briefly considered what he would have written there if the page were about deeds he might perform tonight. He then sighed and wrote nothing, because nothing was what honorable men did when anything would have made a mess. On the rock of Dragonstone, a man with a jaw cut like the prow of a ship read a letter delivered into his hand by a bird that had flown long enough to make its eyes look as old as his. Stannis Baratheon's mouth thinned as he read it, and beside him Davos Seaworth, who had learned to read the weather better than he read letters, waited with the patience of men who have survived both. Stannis finished and looked up at the painted flames on the walls as if they owed him something and had not yet paid. "At last," he said. He remembers himself. He rolled his shoulders as if loosening old ropes. "We go to King's Landing. I will take my ships and my men and my book and my truth. I will bring them all and suffer the mockery and answer it, and if they laugh at me, I will outlast their laughter." Davos bowed his head. "I am Lord." He thought of his sons and of the onion that had made him a lord, and of how sometimes a man chooses a side not because it is lovely but because it is hard and he can bear hard things. He began to plan in his head the stores to load, the numbers to count, the men to speak to the wives of. He thought of King's Landing, which stank of old hopes, and he did not flinch. At Harrenhal, where Tywin Lannister had made a black castle into a golden ledger, a table saw a map receive his hand. He had been standing when the raven came, and he remained standing while he read, because chairs do not ask questions and men do, and standing spares one from questions. He read the words and then set the parchment aside without touching the seal again. He looked at the map, at the roads that flowed like veins toward the heart he did not recognize as his. He did not smile. He did not frown. He moved a small carved horse from one place to another and then did not move it back. He said to Kevin, who was reliable and therefore convenient, "Prepare an answer." And Kevin nodded and did not ask what the answer would be because he knew the answer would be several answers that would make one sound. In King's Landing, at a window that had shown him 100 mornings, Jaime leaned his head against the stone and thought of the way Robert had said thank you, and of the way men's faces look when they are holding back their own worst selves because they have decided to do something with their better parts. He did not envy them their righteousness. He envied them briefly their certainty. Then he smiled at himself because envy is an odd emotion in a man like him, and in smiling he found his balance. He went back to the book and read the entry for Aemon the Dragon Knight and wondered if a man could be those words anymore when the world had learned too many colors in between black and white. Cersei lay on her bed and stared at the canopy and imagined she was a girl in Casterly Rock again, with the mines beneath her like a beast that purred to her lullaby. She thought of her father's face when he is not looking at anyone and discovered that she could not call it back. She thought of her children and of the iron chairs of the city and felt the old anger return, refreshing as bitter herbs. She turned onto her side and slept in a posture that would have made a painter try to get the hands right and fail. Eddard sat in the chair by his window in the Tower of the Hand and cleaned his sword with careful strokes that felt like prayer to a man who did not think of himself as praying. He thought of Winterfell, where men his steward had trained were now looking to the north sky to guess weather, and of Howland Reed in a swamp with his secrets and his frogs, and of a tower that had fallen and a promise that had not. He thought of the faces of his daughters and the ungainly grace of his sons, and felt the work of the day settle into his bones not as pain but as weight. He did not resent the weight. He placed it where it would do no harm to his balance. Robert slept, and in his sleep his face looked younger, as if someone had wiped away a layer of grease and discovered under it the boy with a hammer. He dreamed of a boar that had turned into a man, that had turned into a crown, that had turned into a loaf of bread. He was eating the bread with his hands, tearing it apart to give to men who had never been in his house and were grateful anyway, and his hands were bleeding and he did not mind. He woke once, smiling, and then slept again. In the rookery, the ravens settled their feathers, and a black drift of them like a second night came down on the perches. The city made its last bargains and locked its last doors and lay down. Above it all, the Red Keep breathed, and the breaths were those of many. Of duty and pain and ambition and anger and the small, stubborn, foolish tenderness men carry like a coin in their pocket and forget until their fingers rub it smooth. The morning would come again and ask for the decision again. The morning always does. Tonight, the pieces were on the board, as men would say, though men are rarely as precise as they imagine. The boar's hide in the king's room smelled faintly now of smoke, and the oil rubbed into it to keep it from cracking. The painted stars on the ceiling waited, indifferent to what names men had spoken under them. The sea lapped at the city's stones with the same old tongue. And somewhere, in the long between hours when even the gods appear to rest, a small sound in a quiet corridor signified that a door had opened that had not opened in a year. A boy in a man's boots slipped through and went where he had been told not to go, because telling a boy not to is instructive in ways men forget. He went not to the queen's rooms, but to a stair that led down and down. The hound's dog heard the movement and pricked its ears and settled again, because animals are honest. The boy's heart beat so loud he wondered if the walls could hear it. He told himself a story in which he was proving that doors could not stop him. He reached the place he sought and lifted a latch that had no business being within his reach, and in putting his hand on it, he put his hand on the string of a knot that men wiser than he would spend a year untangling. Above, the king slept on, and the hand sat with his sword, and the queen lay with her eyes closed and dreams old and new, and the walls did what walls do. They held. For now, the stone swallowed the footsteps and returned them to him smaller, as if the castle were willing to devour even sound if it came with a portion of disobedience. The boy kept one hand on the wall, the leather of his glove grating faintly on the gritty lime wash. There was pleasure in the chill of the corridor, pleasure in its secrecy. He had always enjoyed the feeling of being the first to know, even if what he knew could not be told without losing its worth. He paused at the turn where the air changed, cooler still, with a dampness drawn from deep in the keep's bones. A sconce held a stout iron bracket whose pin was shin-height for a man and awkward for a boy. He reached up and felt for the catch with fingers that had found latches and pulled wings from flies with equal care. The pin lifted. Something heavy within the wall let go of itself with a sigh, and a narrow door unglued from the stone. There, he whispered to himself, delight and scorn making the one syllable two flavors. Men lived in this place and still it hid from them. He liked that, flattered him. Beyond, the stair curled downward. He took it lightly, ignoring the way the boots made his toes ache, telling himself that pain was the price of being a man in a boy's skin. The stair opened into a long hall pitched like a throat, hooded in shadow and glistening here and there where damp licked the mortar. The air stank faintly of old ash and something animal that had been scrubbed away and returned as a ghost. It did not frighten him. He would have been angrier if it had. He came at last to the place of skulls. Lanterns always made the teeth look wet. Only in darkness did they sit back into themselves, as if they had finally understood that time had done for them what 1,000 men could not. He walked between the great jaws and listened to the hollow hush of a room where breath had once been a fire. He imagined the flame and himself on a white horse before it, and the horse refused the image. Fine then, the horse was not necessary. He was. Voices filtered in from the far end. Not at first words so much as the shared rhythm of two men who had spoken to each other often enough to forget that their intimacy had a shape. He froze, satisfaction and fear meeting in his chest and introducing themselves like strangers deciding whether they would be lovers or enemies. He went still in the way he had learned to do when he wished to avoid a blow at the training post. A skull to his left seemed to regard him with counsel not much use. He edged between two columns and pressed himself into the long shadow of a broken jaw hinge where a lantern could not easily find him. "Did not plan for this?" said the soft voice that had a way of laying words down as if folding cloth for a chest. "We planned for many storms. This was not one. Plans are for men who pretend to enjoy disappointment," said the other voice, thick with a foreign city's music. "Your king lives. Your lion queen sharpens her smile. The stag with the winter friend believes himself renewed. It is inconvenient." "It is interesting," returned the soft one. "Do not confuse inconvenience with disaster. Disasters arrive wearing their names proudly. This is a change of lunch. The meat tastes different," said the portly voice, "and the cook is not yet paid." "Then we will pay him," murmured the other. "Or we will teach him his hunger. For now we wait. The riverlands burn sooner than I had hoped. The father at Harrenhal will be offended by a letter and will answer with a horse. The younger brother will flirt with war as he flirts with women, publicly and as if no one can be bored by him. The elder brother will come to judge. The wolf's hand is a hard hand. It is foolish, and because it is foolish, it can be trusted. I prefer fools. They leave fewer surprises in their pockets." The boy peered through the slit where two stones met and saw a slice of robe move, pale and abundant, and beside it the shape of a man of size whose rings had their own opinion about the light. He had seen them both often in rooms where other men pretended to forget they were there. He had never seen them here. The thought that there were rooms in the castle where anyone might be at any hour and never be seen made his skin feel alive. "And the dragon girl?" the heavy voice asked. The word dragon made the skulls seem to lean closer. He resisted the childish urge to glance at them. "Your letters spoke of her with poetry." "Well," said the soft voice, and the boy felt his lip curl without meaning it to. "My letters are for their recipients. She is where she should be. The east is long. The west is short. We are in the short place. We will not trip over our own feet here reaching for something 2 continents away. You write like this because it pleases you," the other said, indulgence like oil in his speech. "I write like this because sometimes it does good," said the eunuch. The boy recognized the carriage of the wrists as the man shifted the lantern. He had watched that movement often, admiring and hating it. "Listen, your friend who hides his cleverness will have too much to do. That is good. The queen will think herself wronged. That is useful. The hand will expect betrayal where it ought to be and never where it ought not to be. That is best of all." The portly man exhaled, a deep, satisfied rumble. "It is a busy hive in this king's landing of yours," he said. "Bees make honey and draw bears." "Bees also sting," came the answer. "If you see a bear, do not be the first to say its name. It is impatient. It will come to the pot without your song." They moved off, the light with them, the voices losing their shape and becoming merely sound again, then gone. The boy did not stir for a count of 10, then 20. He found he had kept his breath in, hoarded it as if someone might come and ask him to give it back. He let it out carefully, refusing the little cough that wanted to make a fool of him. He slid along the wall and reached the stair and climbed 2 steps and then, for in a rush, anger at himself for the fear becoming irritation at the stair for being too small. At the top, he restored the pin with the satisfying thunk of a deed done. He straightened his belt and lifted his chin and strode into the corridor with the stride his mother had praised when he had walked from one end of a carpet to the other without being clumsy. He felt tall. He felt like a secret that could wear shoes. He thought of the eunuch's hands and the fat man's rings, and he smiled sharply. Men who spoke like that believed themselves clever with their soup and their talk of bears. He would feed them something they did not expect. He went to his mother and told her that men beneath the castle spoke of him and of the hand in language that made him want to spit. He embellished without needing to. Cersei listened with her head tilted slightly, as if catching a tune that interested her only because it was new. When he was done, the line between her brows smoothed a fraction, which meant she was angry and pleased. "Good," she said, which was not what he had expected. "You did not ask them a single question. Well done. It would have made the song go out of them. And now we know where and when the song is sung. There is a door I had not considered you would be tall enough to open yet. We will remember it." She put her hand on his cheek and let it rest there as if measuring something. "Stay close to me until I say otherwise. The eunuch likes secrets too much. Men like him will sell you yours at discount." He nodded, as if he were not already halfway to believing himself the man in the skull room. Before dawn had fully dissolved, Varys sat at a desk that had never had a stain upon it and unrolled 3 pieces of paper in succession, read them, and then placed them in different boxes. A small boy with scarred ears stood at the door and watched the eunuch handle words as if they were insects to be pinned. Gently, firmly, with the knowledge that they can sting even dead. "Go sleep," Varys murmured without turning his head. The boy went. Varys dipped his pen and wrote a note to a man at the docks who preferred to be thought a fool. Wrote a second to a woman who sold herbs to the queen's maid. Wrote a third to the alchemists who brewed wildfire and never noticed anything else because nothing else burned as bright. He named their names with flattery. He set their tasks with fussing. He smiled as he worked, not with pleasure but with the relief of a routine performed exactly. He did not write to Illyrio again. That would be rude to their friendship and unwise for his purposes. He would let the fat man's reassurance fatten itself on absence as men's fears sometimes do the same. He turned to the second half of his morning and went to the hand with news about the docks, the watch, the small gods. Eddard received him standing and took the reports with thanks that meant what the word contained without being made pretty. He had been awake since before the lamps burned low. He had slept 4 hours, 2 of them in the chair with the sword unsheathed and oiled, and 2 in the bed that did not fit him. He had dreamed of a gate that would not shut, and had woken with the sensation of a cold wind on his neck as if someone had left that gate ajar. He did not mention it. He did not believe in dreams that told a man something he could not learn with his eyes open. 2 wagons presented themselves at the King's Gate at an uninteresting hour, Varys said mildly. The men were too tidy for the work they pretended to do. The hay in the one was cut to a uniformity so pleasing I confess even I felt gratitude. The other was carrying barrels of fish for someone's aunt near the Dragon Gate. Both declined to allow inspection of their wares. The watch allowed, your men did not. Eddard lifted his brows when the eunuch paused. What did we find? He asked, finding the we without effort because it left out that unwelcome word you that made everything an accusation. Under the clean hay, for noble red cloaks with the golden lion sewn honest and well, and a purse sewn into the hem of the driver's tunic heavy enough to change his posture. Varys said, in the fish barrels. O Lord, if I tell you, you will smell it all day. Suffice it to say we should instruct the guard to wear neckerchiefs in future when one must open barrels in which fish have been encouraged to spoil as a sign of authenticity. Below the fish, 8 mail shirts folded finely enough that a careful man would admire the craftsmanship. Below those, 2 short swords and a dirk with its edge wrapped so that it not get a notion to cut something it oughtn't. Disguised Lannister men, Eddard said. Not enough to fight, enough to be counted later and multiply with their mouths. Varys spread his hands, blank palms. If one wishes to plant nettles, one brings a basket. You found the basket. Janos Slint's men allowed them to pass it first, Eddard said, not accusing, naming. And then did not. They were assisted by your men who carry the smell of pine and snow like a charm, Varys said. I believe those particular watchmen will cease to love me when they discover the word of their lenience has already gone to their commander. Let it go, Eddard said. Let Slint know as much as he can bear without running to my enemy with his hands open. Keep him ours until he cannot be. He looked toward the window. Has the queen asked to see the king? He asked. Not yet, Varys said. She sent a sweet roll down to the kitchens for the children with a note saying she fears the old knight does not understand how hard young bodies work at their exercises. It arrived accompanied by a bottle of very good wine for Ser Barristan that will not reach his hand. He permitted himself a very slight smile as Eddard snorted. She has sent for Lord Baelish twice. The second time he had a different smile when he left her. I cannot tell you if that is good or not. His smiles are not thick with meaning. They are thin and made to slip where they like. I will see Baelish again, Eddard said, and Slint, and I will go to the armorer, the one you sent me to. Tobo Mott, Varys said, a good man for a smith. He is from Qohor and remembers everything he learned there. His hands are steady as a bridge. He showed no surprise at the shift. He had known the hand would come to the boy sooner or later. He had hoped for sooner, if only because it might teach certain men what mercy looked like when it wore a sober cloak. Eddard sent for a chair that could carry the king decently. Robert did not argue. He argued about being dressed, about being helped into the chair, about the need for boots, about the way the poles were gripped, about the number of guards. He argued as a way of reminding himself that command had a living voice. Then he went. The morning was pale and clean. The city received him with the odd hush that comes when men are surprised and trying not to show it. A woman bent with a basket of radishes lifted her chin and smiled, and then was surprised at herself for smiling. A baker's boy dropped a loaf and was cuffed and then laughed in the next breath. The sedan chair was a ship moving in a channel of bodies, and the king sat on it and did not pretend otherwise. He waved once, awkwardly, to a child who waved at him. The child beamed as if he had been knighted. The king looked pained and then pleased and then cross that he had been pleased. At the armorers, heat and iron welcomed them as a friend welcomes grief, intimately, without surprise. The hammer rose and fell, Tobo Mott's arms bending with the ease of a man who has done something so long his muscles no longer argue about it. He looked up, and his face did not lose its guarded calm. He bowed with the hands he had, stains and scars and all. "Your Grace," he said, "my lord." He glanced at Varys without acknowledging him as anything but a man. Varys, who took slight carefully when he took it at all, counted Tobo among the free. "To what do I owe the honor?" Robert did not pretend he had not come for a private reason. "A boy," he said. "Show me him." Mott looked at Eddard, and Eddard nodded once. The armorer put aside his hammer, wiped his hands, and went into the back room where a forge's small fire had been kept polite. He returned with a youth whose hair was black as wet feathers and whose eyes were the blue that makes men make long-distance promises to themselves. The boy stood with his jaw set as if daring anyone to say what stood on his face and in his shoulders. He had the beginning of thickness in him, the sort that turns into strength if taught and into beer if not. He looked at the king as if the king were a stranger he had been ordered to respect. He looked at Eddard as if Eddard were the problem a teacher sets a student who hates the exercise. "What's your name?" Robert asked. He had intended to make a jest. He found himself unwilling. "Gendry," the boy said. He did not add a "my lord" or "your grace." Then, slowly suspicious, he added, "Your grace," and did not stumble. "Do you like the hammer?" Robert asked. It was an absurd question, and it reopened a place in him with surprising gentleness. "Yes," the boy said. "It fits." Robert grunted, not trusting himself to say anything that would not make a scene in his own head. He looked around at the metal, at the way light and soot quarreled on polished plates. He set his jaw. "Eddard," he said, without looking at the hand. "I want him placed somewhere he cannot accidentally die of someone's malice." Mott stiffened, protective. "He is an apprentice," he said carefully. "An expensive one. He loses me coin while he learns and will earn it back if he keeps his hands." "You'll be paid," Robert said. "He won't be taken from you now. Not now. Not until we can call it something other than kidnapping. But one of my men will stand here dressed as a buyer and will buy what must be bought, and another will dress as a beggar and will beg with a knife under his shirt, and the boy will not walk home alone in the dark. Do you understand me, Smith?" Mott bowed his head, the gesture that free men make when it honors them to be asked and they mean to allow it for their own sense of correctness. "I do, your grace." Robert looked at the boy again, and for an instant he was on a roof under stars with a wineskin, telling himself lies on purpose because the truth would have been too much work to honor. "Do you have a mother?" he asked suddenly, awkward as a fist at a wake. "She died," Gendry said. He did not flinch or pretend, as some would, that he would not. "When I was small, she had yellow hair. She sang." Robert swallowed and felt something in his throat that was not pain. He nodded and made an effort to be brisk. "Learn," he said. "Don't be a fool. Don't go to the wrong rooms. Hit what you mean to hit. That's all." He signaled for the chair to turn. The boy watched him go without bowing. When the procession had gone 15 paces, the boy bowed then, an awkward duck, as if his body had decided without his mind. No one marked it save Varys, who marked most things that were none of his business. As they were carried through the cobbled streets, a small cluster of men at a corner watched with careful faces that tried for blankness and achieved expectancy. One of them wore the sort of red cloak that is not a red cloak, the dye cheap and the cut clumsy. but red enough to comfort a man who likes to think of himself as a lion. Eddard's men saw them see and did not show that they had. When they reached the keep, the chair rose the long incline. Robert endured the incline with a curt oath and refused to be set down until his chamber. On Dragonstone, Claw Isle could be seen far across the dark water like a cat asleep. Stannis Baratheon's men moved along the quay with the deliberate haste of a man evenly coiling a rope. Maester Cresson watched them and felt old and useful and not needed all at once. He stood at Stannis' side and read over the shoulder the notes for provisioning with an eye practiced to spot where a line of chalk had tried to skip a step. "You will be at sea 3 days," he said. "If weather holds. If it does not, 5. He saw Stannis' jaw and offered it a compromise. 4. Stannis' mouth twitched, which in some men would have been laughter. "I will be as long as I need to be. Send a bird to my lady wife. Tell her to burn the floors with her walking while I am gone. It will comfort her." Cresson inclined his head, that small teacher's bow he made to boys and men alike. He felt the warm presence at the edge of his notice before he allowed it fully. He turned his head and acknowledged the red woman with the evenness he had learned for her. Melisandre of Asshai moved as if the air had been made to part for her and had trained for the honor. Her eyes found Stannis. They had always been good at finding him. "The night is eager," she said. "The day holds itself like a man told to wait for grace. Your brother still lives." "He does," Stannis said. His voice did not betray feeling. It rarely did. "He calls me to come and bring him a back he can use as a wall. At last he has found his wall. You will bring him a sword he will not wish to hold," Melisandre said, "and a law he does not like to read." She smiled, the small smile she wore when she wished him to remember that gods were not insults to a man's mind but truths he could be consulted upon. "If you wish, my lord, I will go with you." "No," Stannis said. "This is not your fight." "It is always my fight," she said, unoffended. "But I will be where you ask me to be." "Be here," Stannis said. He did not look at her again. He looked at Davos, who was at that moment making a neat list of the figs and almonds being loaded and calculating in his head how many fewer mouths were fed if the wind turned sour. "Davos," he said. Davos glanced up, and Stannis inclined his head in something very like gratitude. "You are a ship I am willing to stand upon. You do not make much of a noise when the waves do." Davos ducked his head, a man accustomed to being asked to do a thing because he will do it and not because anyone will clap. "Aye." Cresson watched the exchange and breathed easier, and then did not, because the sea never permitted too much ease. He thought of the letter sent to Lannisport in his own hand, many months ago, with words that had been more careful than his pen. He thought of the candles he had yet to light and the one he might not be able to snuff. He thought of the king alive. He whispered a prayer that did not belong to any new fire. At Harrenhal, Tywin's light burned without trembling. The castle tried to intimidate. He ignored it as the insult of a man with old scars. He had chairs moved and tapestries hung and a table placed with regard to door and window, so that the wind through the high arrow slit was directed to make papers behave. His servants moved in the silent style of those who have learned their lord's silence matters. When his scribe read back the letter to King's Landing, the words had the bony cruelty of a thing that refused to be called rude. He signed it. He had another drawn for his daughter with none of the niceties and all the intention. As his hand moved, his mind walked to the Golden Tooth and stood there, placing Gregor's men like a man pours small sharp stones down a slope to see how they catch. He did not frown when he learned of 2 wagons turned aside at the gate that morning. He placed the information where it belonged and added metal to the next attempt. "You will send men to the crossings," he said to Kevin. "Not to sit, to pass through. I want witnesses telling the right stories, not men giving the wrong orders." He did not say aloud the other thought, "If it comes to it, we will starve them and call it honor." He did not need to say it. He had trained himself not to speak thoughts that did not need air. In the Tower of the Hand, Sansa Stark waited with her hands folded and her head poised because there was no other way to wait that made her feel like the waiting was a virtue. Septa Mordain sat with her, the habitual firmness of her presence somewhat softened by the velvet cushion and the way afternoon light ate the severity of her jaw. Arya sat too, but like a cat sits, coiled and rude. She had not wanted to be made to stay with her sister. She wanted to run after Syrio Farrell and hit something clever. She wanted to be told to run. She swung her feet. The Septa looked at them and said nothing because she had learned that sometimes telling a child to be still makes the kid move for spite. Their father came with a weariness that made Sansa's heart want to rise and bring back the boy he had been. He smiled at them with that limited smile tired fathers give their children, which says, "I see you even when I cannot hold you now." "You will both remain here," he said gently. "And if a man with a soft voice and no hair tells you a story, you will listen and then tell me the story later without adding your own improvements. And if a man with a small mustache tells you, he can bring you lace you have never seen before if you only come to a certain room." "I won't go with Littlefinger," Arya said, nose wrinkling. Sansa hid a look that might have been disdain. "Why would we be invited to Lord Baelish's rooms?" she asked, scandalized enough to forget to be delicate. "Because men like him do not think of themselves as men who have rooms at all," Eddard said, and that was too complicated a truth to be a good lesson for the moment. He kissed Sansa's hair and touched Arya's head with 2 fingers and left them with Septa Mordain and 2 of his own who would not leave the door even for the promise of a night in their own beds. The small council met again with the sun finding a different place on the wall to display its interest. Robert stood long enough to convince himself he could and then sat and watched men behave as they always did when they required his signature for their lives to matter. He found it both moving and tiresome. Cersei had not come. She was occupied with a supper for the ladies of the court, a thing she did with a smile that made women feel they were tickets to a play, and the play would prove that their husbands were fools. Eddard allowed it, not because it served him, he doubted it did, but because it lay squarely in the realm of courtesies he was unwilling to deny for the sake of feeling effective. Littlefinger's ledger lay open on the table like a knife offered with a smile. Pycelle spoke in plodding sentences. Varys warned them that 2 Tyroshi ships had different names painted on their sterns than they did yesterday. Renly leaned back and tossed a peach up and down and finally bit it because he could bear his own theatrics for only so long. Robert signed 2 things and refused a third, then deflected a 4th and accepted a 5th because it pleased him to be both burden and relief in the same hour. In the late afternoon, Catelyn Stark's party came weary to the Eyrie after a climb that had taught the muscles in their legs new hymns. Tyrion Lannister walked with an insouciance that appeared more cheerful by contrast with the terror in the men around him. He had made a friend of the Sellsword with the tired grin. He had made a kind of friend of the woman who had not imagined herself doing any of the things she had done in the last day and now somehow had. Lisa Arryn received her sister with her child clinging like a small lord who had discovered that power could be exercised in cups of milk and bolts for doors alike. The sight of Tyrion made her eyes light with triumph and fear in equal measure. "You bring me proof," she said. "You bring me a talisman. You bring me something I can point to that makes the night less frightening." When Catelyn corrected her gently and said she brought her a man to answer, Lisa smiled in the way of people whose fears always answer them in the affirmative. The nights were not yet cold in King's Landing, only cooler, and the first lamps were just being lit when the Queen's supper drew women like moths with rings. It glittered. It had the right smells, the right lace, the right distance between tables to preserve dignity and permit gossip. Cersei presided as if born to become a hostess when her men wished to think of other things. There was no accident in the arrangement. Sansa sat at her right as the chosen pretty country stag brought to the urban feast, and this flattered the girl and earned Cersei 20 stories to spend later. Marjorie Tyrell was not yet in the city. A red wine cousin laughed in the pretty way that makes laughter travel, and the wives and daughters of lords who had been planning to go home at week's end decided to stay longer and be safer in rooms with more candles. Cersei's mind divided itself and attended to 3 matters at once. Her children's faces when they returned to her from the old knight's tutelage, the letter from her father whose courteous words burned more than insult could, and the description Joffrey had offered of the skull room conversation. Between compliments, she placed her servants. Between toasts, she sent her whispers. She smiled at Sansa and told her she would make a queen of her yet, and when Sansa's face shone, She evaluated the light not as a mother does, but as a strategist with a taste for weaponry. The Stark girl wanted the chair and the boy upon it. The Stark girl wanted to be told that wanting it was noble. This desire could be used in a dozen ways. Perhaps the easiest would be to bid the girl to write letters. Not yet, but soon. The sight of innocence signing a page had its uses. Later, when the hall had emptied itself of color and left behind the scraped taste of wine, Cersei went alone down the corridor that led toward the door Joffrey had shown her, or rather, toward the wall that was no longer only a wall. She did not open it. That would have been foolish. She measured its height against her shoulder and memorized the pattern of the stones, and then turned and returned to her rooms and wrote a quick note to a man in her service whose only talent was to stand in the wrong places and make it look accidental. She told him to walk certain corridors at certain hours until told otherwise, and to yawn as often as could be borne without insult. Eddard, in the same hour, stood at a different door with two of his Northmen and knocked once, twice, then a third time. Lancel Lannister sat within on a stool too low for him and rose quickly enough to show he knew he had been given a stool too low for him. He had been kept comfortable as ordered, bread with honey, meat not overcooked, a blanket free of lice, a chamber pot changed without his being told why that was a kindness. He looked better than the last time Robert had seen him and worse than was strictly necessary. "You will speak," Eddard said, with no harshness. "You will tell me what you were told to tell me and what you were not told to tell me but told me anyway. You will do it now because it is better for you to do so while the king is in a mood to be merciful to children." "I am not a child," Lancel said, and the last word shook with humiliation. He swallowed it back. "My lady, the queen, she is my lady. She told me to pour. She told me that kings should not hunt with empty cups. She told me that if I loved my place, I would act as if the king were two men and I was called upon to fill both." "A clever sentence," Eddard said. "Did she tell you to keep filling when he said he had drunk enough?" Lancel's eyes flickered. "She said kings only say that because they want you to prove it isn't true." "Did she tell you to travel with that particular cask?" Eddard asked. The boy's blink told him the answer before the boy did. "We will not break your bones for being stupid," he said, picking up the truth and placing it where it belonged. "We will hold you until the king says you may be held no longer. Think on the mercy of that." When he left the boy, Eddard stood with his back to the wall and closed his eyes for a count of 5. He did not like interrogations. He liked, even less, the distinctive taste of justice when it wished to be called punishment for someone manageable. He went to Robert and described the conversation with a spareness that was kind to the listener. "And if I order him whipped?" Robert asked. He asked it with the dryness of a man arguing with his worst self before anyone else had the chance. "You may order your own shame," Eddard said. "Better to use him as a witness when you must, and let him live long enough to learn the sort of regret that improves a man's life rather than rots it." Robert grimaced. "You have a way of making me feel like a dog taught not to chew the rug," he said, but there was no resentment worth naming in it. He looked at the boar's hide and at the painted stars and at his hands. "Very well. He will live and be bored under guard. It is a fair punishment." He rubbed at the bandage on his side and said, "I am tired of rooms. Send me Renly. He smells of the hall. It will make me feel less a piece of furniture." Renly came in silk that made a small sound and a grin that did not. He sat, asked after the wound as if it were a person, accepted the lie that it was improving as a courtesy, and then set himself to the work of charm. He told 2 brief stories about the yard that made Robert bark laughter and then hiss with the pain and then laugh again at that. He spoke of bread coming from the Reach and of letters that would bring men if letters could. He allowed himself the smallest degree, the talk that he used with friends and never with enemies. "If the worst comes to the city," he said, "will you allow me to move the ladies of the court to Maegor's Holdfast? It is ugly and it is safe, and that is the best combination for a storm. Or will you have them in the bowels of the keep with the skulls and the old bones? That has charm of a kind too, and it would gratify our sly friend that we finally used his favorite halls." Robert rubbed his jaw. "Maegor's Holdfast," he said. Gods save me from skulls and from anything that makes Varys's toes curl with pleasure. If we clutch the court into the holdfast too soon, Cersei will call it an insult. If we clutch it too late, it becomes an apology, Renly said. Your hand will choose the hour with his stern face. I will carry the message with my laughing one. Between us, we will make men obey without thinking of disobedience's glamour. He rose. One more thing. Your White Knight is performing miracles with Tommen and Myrcella that will irritate their mother and endear him to me awfully. Shall I praise him to his face or at council where it will embarrass him properly? Leave him alone, Robert said, grinning despite himself. He is an old tree that has never learned to accept water poured from a jug. Praise rolls off him and makes puddles in the dirt. He only gets mud on his boots for the trouble. Outside, the sky cleaned its corners for evening. Runners carried messages and were always surprised to find themselves exactly as tired as men who had carried water all day. The watch rotated. Slint's hand left a little sweat on a particular seal. He opened to read orders and then wiped. Certain no one saw, certain wrong. Littlefinger met a fence in the Street of Steel and bought a pair of jewels that would be given as a favor to a man he disliked because men he disliked were the best carriers for gifts that might cause trouble later. Varys listened to a child who had watched a servant of the Queen stand near a blank stretch of wall for an hour and yawn. He filed that next to the report of the boy in the man's boots seen returning to his own rooms with his face full of importance. He rubbed his temples. He did not care for boys with faces full of importance unless they could be taught to empty the expression on command. Joffrey required a different sort of schooling. The next morning brought sun and a letter with Tywin Lannister's name at the bottom and all the warmth of a blade. It arrived in a Lannister red tube with a lion's head carved upon the cap and said in the measured way practiced by men who prefer offense but have contented themselves with derision for the day. To his grace, Robert of the House Baratheon, King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. Lords are summoned to court by laws they themselves uphold. Fathers come to their daughters by love and habit. I have never neglected either, despite the impudent suggestions of those who have enjoyed my hospitality and fled it when there was work to be done. My men ride where they are told by their lord. They have not ridden against the king's peace. They have ridden in the king's name to seek satisfaction against an outrage done upon my blood and house by those who believe highwayman's justice honorable because it is performed with tears. If the hand of the king wishes to discuss this with me, let him come to Harrenhal where I make war on hunger and banditry and make calculations for harvest. I will receive him, and we will speak as equals until he rests upon the fact of his office and I upon the substance of my house. If he will not come, send me the king. I will receive him with all courtesy. I will bring no more men than my conscience requires for safety. I remind your grace that my squeak longest when they believe cats have left the room. Lord Tywin Lannister. Robert laughed when Eddard read it to him and then growled and then laughed again. He calls you a mouse and me a cat and himself a house, he said, amused in spite of himself. He thinks of himself as the man who cleans the barn, Eddard said. We will answer not with animals but with words he understands. We will not go to him. We will call him here. We will say thank you for your letter. We await your arrival until the day named, after which your failure to appear will be entered into the book men read when they call a lord to account. Will he come? Robert asked. No, Eddard said, and that will be useful. A second letter came that day from Stannis. He was embarked. He would come and bring his law and refusal to accept anyone else's comfort. He would arrive with 10 ships and 20 casks of stubbornness and Davos seaworth, who carried more use than he admitted in his eyes. Eddard smiled at that without meaning to, imagining the man with the onions on his sail and the stumps with which he counted. He sent orders that men be ready at the quay to greet Stannis with the perfect degree of stiffness required to make him feel both welcome and irritated. The city filled the day with errands. Arya slipped her guard twice and returned twice because Syrio had told her to do so, and on the second return she brought the guard a catskin coin she had found somewhere clever and told him it was for being less slow than the other man would have been. He put it in his purse and did not admit that it made him like her. Sansa received a favor of silk from a lady who wished to be seen wishing it, and she blush-blossomed and then took the silk to Septa Mordain, who made her relearn the prayer for humility as a penance, not because she needed penance, but because she needed a pattern to hold her when her illusions threatened to run ahead of her. Dawn of the following day broke with a clean blue and a salt wind. The harbor awoke like a beast yawned. Stannis' ships came in with sails trimmed like fingernails, precise and careful, each movement making the next inevitable. He stood at the prow and did not wave and did not bow and did not do anything but come. Robert received him at a balcony and looked down on the men boarding and then disembarking with the quickness that belongs to men who have done this often and wish to do something else. He watched Stannis ascend with his mouth set and his eyes measuring. He watched Davos come 2 steps behind with a calm that would have made a better king than many men's fuss. He waited until they stood in the yard and then went down himself, because to send the hand to greet a brother whom he had summoned would have been petty. They regarded one another for a moment. 2 men whose shared history had more weather than they had faces left to show it. Stannis' gaze pulled the truth of his assessment onto Robert's face, and Robert endured it. Then Stannis inclined his head not as a brother or a vassal, but as a man greeting a fact. "You live," he said.
"Ido," Robert answered.
"We have work." They went inside where the walls had ears and the ears knew their places. Eddard stood by the table with the maps and made his respects to Stannis as one master of duty makes to another. Stannis returned them exactly. Varys spilled himself in compliments that named food and ships. Littlefinger counted loudly and was not heard. Pycelle trembled and called it enthusiasm. Renly smiled and made a jest about the fleet that made Stannis' mouth not move while his eyes registered the angle of the joke. Davos stood and kept his mouth shut until asked. Barristan stood back and watched men he could not easily place on the chart of his heart. Eddard laid it out. The letters, the raids, the wagons, the queen contained, the children guarded, the White Knight placed where he could do most good without being asked to do wrong. The watch commander held near, the harbor under watch, the gates, the ravens, the summons to Tywin, the refusal dressed up as courtesy. Stannis listened without nodding often, as men do when they save their nods for the places where they are not merely punctuation. At the end, he said, "We should arrest the queen and her brother both." "We will," Eddard said, "when the city is quiet enough to accept it." "You let sentiment guide you," Stannis said, "and the law ought not be a sentiment. It ought to be a way of preserving peace," Eddard said. "If peace can be preserved while we keep the law in our pocket for a moment longer, I will bear the hypocrisy." "You always have," Stannis said, and the line that might have been cruel could be heard as recognition by those who wanted to do so. "I am here. I will put my men where you tell me. I will read your orders before you send them to see if they require correction. I will say a thing when it needs saying and will not speak when it does not. I will not flatter you or your king. I will help him live." Robert laughed. "There you are," he said, almost with affection. "I knew if I clapped my hands the old miser of praise and comfort would come to refuse me alone." He sobered and put his hand out. Stannis looked at it, then took it. They did not squeeze. They held. Davos cleared his throat softly. He did not look at anyone but the map. "Lords," he said, "if I might be permitted, a thought about the river." "Speak," Stannis said, without turning. "Your bird from Riverrun spoke of men missing on a road, and the small folk hiding," Davos said. "If Lord Tywin means to draw the river lords to crying and then to answer their cry with a charge that they are the ones who made the noise, he will want those folk to be frightened enough to pick up their sacks. If you send men under a banner that looks like coin instead of wolf, they might come out without fear and tell you what's worth hearing." Eddard looked at the smuggler's face and found it worth the listening. "Whose banner looks like coin?" "Lord Peter's," Davos said with a bit of humor. "If he is willing to stop counting for long enough to lend it to you." Littlefinger put a hand to his heart. "I will always stop counting for you, Davos Seaworth," he said, and managed to make it both affectionate and a barb. "Lord Stark, I will put 2 wagons with my sign on them on the King's Road by sunset with men who look like me, thin and smiles and a bit of the fox. They will ask the right questions and tell me the right lies and bring me the right truths. I will then sell those truths to you at cost, because you are a friend." He grinned. "Do it," Eddard said. He looked to Stannis. "If he is to smuggle me truth, will you object?" "I object to much," Stannis said. "Not to that." The meeting broke with the kind of formality that makes rooms feel cleaner without changing anything. Stannis had quarters prepared that were merely adequate because that was what he preferred. Davos went down to speak to the men about boil water and discipline. Renly met his brother in a small hall and put a hand on his arm and said something that was, in another family, a joke about mothers. Stannis did not laugh. He did not strike him. He simply stood, and Renly took his hand away and smiled a smaller smile and went. That afternoon, Slynt received a second purse into his office the way a priest receives a confession, reluctantly and with calculation. He did not yet know whether the purse had been left by the same hand as the first. He suspected it, and that suspicion made him uneasy because he liked his benefactors to be large and distinguishable. He set it in the safe and turned the key and sat down and stared at the door. When he looked up and saw Varys standing there with his hands folded, he flinched despite himself. "Ah," he said, and went red with his own betrayal. "My lord eunuch, you creep." "I float," Varys said, apologetic. "So much of my work is to appear without troubling other men's sense of self. You are troubled." He looked at the safe with polite disinterest. "Perhaps because you have had to go shopping without your lady's permission." Slynt swallowed. "I serve the throne." "You serve yourself," Varys said kindly, "as do we all. Choose which version of yourself you prefer to serve. The one that will last is the one I recommend. I am very good at choosing versions of men. I chose the right you when I whispered your name the day you were made what you are." Janos Slynt took a breath that contained several words he did not say. "What do you want?" he asked at last. Varys tilted his head. "Only for you to know that if you falter, the men who will come to replace you are already in the building. It is useful, I find, for a man to know there is a bench." He smiled. "Do you like watching the tourneys?" "I do," Slynt said, startled. "Some men fall," Varys said, "and the horse keeps running. It is a lesson. Do you wish revenge on the horse? Or do you get up and find your legs are good for walking?" He bowed and left without waiting for an answer. At sunset, the queen went to the sept and knelt and murmured and did not think of gods. She thought of public piety and how much it weighed compared to calls to law. On her way back, she saw Loras Tyrell in the yard laughing at something that had not been funny and felt a sharp dislike for the boy's beauty rise and subside. Not because she minded beauty, she had made a kingdom of it, but because he wielded it without shame. She made a note to have her maid's cousin reported for some small impropriety where the Tyrells would hear it and feel obliged to correct it. Small importances made larger ones behave. On the same hour, a handful of Peter Baelish's men went out under his banner, jaunty as cheaters. They returned late with a list of names and 2 testimonies scrubbed clean of panic. One woman spoke of Sellswords wearing mismatched armor who claimed to be sworn to no man, which meant they were sworn to a man who liked to cause that confusion. One boy told of a river ford where 2 ox carts had been commandeered by men with crimson cords under the neck of their mail shirts. Peter read the notes and flipped them neatly into Eddard's hand along with a smile. "You may pay me tomorrow," he said. "Your bill will be full of surprises," Eddard said. "I will pay it anyway." He slept that night for 5 hours, more than he had the night before. He woke before dawn at a sound. It was a soft sound, and he could not place it for a moment. Then he knew it, the skitter inside a wall that had not been there yesterday. He rose, buckled on a tunic, and took his sword in its scabbard and opened his door. The men outside rose. He walked into the corridor and paused. Varys materialized as if he had been called by a syllable. "There," Eddard said, pointing to a blank stretch of wall where the mortar was new to his eye. "Ah," Varys said. He did not ask how Eddard knew to look there. "Shall we place a chair against it?" "Place a man in the chair," Eddard said. "One who will look as if he is sleeping. Give him a knife in his sleeve, and place another man behind the tapestry." He gestured to the opposite wall where a hunting scene played out with wolves made to look gentle to a lord's vanity. "Who will not fall asleep and place me in my bed? I wish very much to make a point." They did. An hour passed. The wall door did not open. 2 hours. The city woke. Kitchens began their clatter. Cocks crowed in an inconsistent choir. The chair creaked a fraction as the man in it shifted the knife in his sleeve. The tapestry watcher did not itch. Eddard remained in his bed with his eyes open and remembered the final sound in his dream. A gate. He breathed evenly. He was not trying to catch a man, he was trying to teach a wall to speak. He would let it do so in its time. It did not. Not yet. Whoever had moved through that door when it was not his to move had decided to be cautious. Varys showed his teeth in a smile that was not friendly. "It is always the dangerous ones who have the patience to wait." "The boy said he had been there," Eddard said, and did not add the name. He was reluctant to make of Joffrey's trespass something prosecutable. There were enough prosecutable things in the castle to keep them busy for a decade. "The boy also enjoys telling stories," Varys said. "We will keep both possibilities in mind. In the meantime, I will change the rumor about the king's confession to the rumor that the king is discussing the building of a new wing of the castle for a future I have not named. Carpenters move in and out without raising eyebrows, and behind them can walk other men." "Do it," Eddard said. He rubbed his thigh through the cloth and frowned at his own body for reminding him that it had limits. "And have Renly prepare to bring the ladies to the holdfast tomorrow, under the pretense of honoring the mother, or some such, with a ceremony where she can be invoked without offending the warrior. The queen may dislike the smell of it, but she cannot publicly oppose it." Varys's eyes sparkled. "You are learning how to steer with ribbons," he murmured. "It does an old courtesan's heart good to see such competence bloom in a man who prefers to be a farmer." "Don't call me a farmer," Eddard said flatly. "Farmers don't like to be called courtiers." That afternoon, Joffrey committed the small betrayal children commit who spoke as if they were men. He found Sansa in the hall and spoke to her with courtesy and did not meet her eyes longer than necessary. He asked after her mourning and her needlework and said he hoped to see her in the yard when he was permitted again his sword. He made her feel honored in precise measure. He calculated without thinking of it that a graciousness would cost him nothing and keep him something he imagined was his due. Sansa curtsied, confused by the daylight between yesterday's scowl and today's kindness, and then grateful for the space that allowed her to place him again on the dais where she had always kept him. She smiled and told him she had made a favor for him with her own hand. He accepted it and put it in his sleeve and wished the hound were there to see him, because the hound was the measuring stick he had decided to use for his bravery whenever his mother wasn't available. When Sansa had left, he took the favor from his sleeve and looked at it and felt an irritation he could not name. Then, on impulse, walked to a window and dropped it onto a ledge, intending to take it later when it would not scratch his arm. The day after that, the queen allowed herself to be seen making an offering at the Great September of Baelor. She knelt beside a carved mother whose face was worn smooth by hope and put a coin at her feet with a clink she had practiced. The crowd murmured. Some of the murmurs were respectful, some were jealous, some were merely sound. She rose and made that expression she had invented for public pity. She placed her hand on the arm of a woman whose husband had been taken by the watch for brawling and told her that everything that is not a sin is a misfortune. And the woman went away and said she had been comforted by the queen. Cersei returned to the keep and instructed a man to stand at the inner postern and tell her who passed with packages. She had discovered that while men can be persuaded to speak, packages do not lie. She slept poorly. Each time she woke, she saw Jaime's face in the White Sword Tower and felt anger at the men who had told her she could not have what she wanted simply by wanting it. She did not weep. The next morning she smiled and wore blue and invited Septa Mordain to tea and spoke to Sansa about the difficulties that come when a city is asked to be calm and how bravery in a woman looks like bearing small discomforts without complaint. Sansa sat very straight and glowed very prettily and did not, for once, make the mistake of promising to do what she did not understand. On the 5th day after Stannis arrived, 2 things happened between breaths, as things often do when men have done enough to deserve a reward and are very close to receiving a punishment. The first was that Balan Swan rode in from the King's Road bleeding from his shoulder and reported that the Whispering Wood had told a secret to the wrong men. A small party from Lannisport had been confounded by archers in a copse near the crossing, and 3 men had been taken, one of them a cousin of a cousin who mattered only because the family name mattered. The second was that the secret door in the Tower of the Hand finally opened. It did not open at night. It opened at noon, which is the single most foolish and therefore the boldest hour to open a secret. The man in the chair with the knife fell into his role, adjusting his slouch without losing his knife. The tapestry watcher did not move. The door shifted a fraction, then more, and a man who had expected to slip into shadow found himself standing in light. He hesitated only a fraction longer than his training could afford and then began his story as if he had been granted permission to tell it. "My Lord Hand," he said, smiling the company smile used for campfires and thieves' dens alike, "I was told you wished to see me about a matter that needed a particular kind of prudence." Littlefinger took one step into the room and lifted his hands empty and easy. Eddard watched him from the bed and let the quiet gather until it was a rope. "Close the door behind you, Peter," he said at last. "It is too early in the day for drafts." Littlefinger's eyes flicked to the crack where stone parted. "Ah," he said, "so we are to be honest." "For once," Eddard said. "You are useful, Baelish. You are dangerous. You have bought and sold the city 3 times in the last week without ever counting the coin in a place where it could be seen. You use doors other men do not acknowledge exist. You could be killed for that alone and there would be legal cause. I will not kill you. I will ask you to say out loud in this room what you say to yourself when you are counting. Whom do you serve?" "Peter Baelish," Peter said without shame. "But when I am bored with him, I serve the man who amuses me most. And lately, my lord, that has been you." "Serve the realm," Eddard said. "It will not amuse you. It will not make you rich. It will sometimes require you to be poor in one coin to be paid in another you do not value. It will cost you friends you never cherished while forcing you to keep company with men you cannot bear. And if you do it, I will let you go on living where you most enjoy it, precariously at the center of everything, imagining you are indispensable. If you do not, I will take you to the yard and cut your throat, and I will do it in such a way that men will call it justice." Littlefinger smiled and inclined his head as if Eddard had offered him a dish of something interesting. "You speak very prettily for a man who also swings a sword," he said. "Very well. Today I will serve the realm. Tomorrow I will reassess the invitation." He looked back at the door and touched the edge of the stone with a tenderness that was almost affection. "Close, you jealous thing," he whispered to it, and it whispered shut. He came away and sat on the chair and crossed one leg over the other and made himself comfortable in the awkwardness he had brought. "Shall we have a list?" he asked. "You do like lists. Tell me first," Eddard said, "what you told the Queen last night." "I told her that the watch was being moved to places that made her efforts at rearranging it more difficult, and that this meant the hand was likely in the king's confidence," Littlefinger said. "I told her that if she wished to move her son from one place to another while making it look like a religious exercise, she should do it 2 days from now and not 3, because on the 3rd day the doors to Maegor's Holdfast would be closed to everyone with an inadequate excuse. I told her that if she wished to bribe Slint again, she should use a different size purse than the last time, because men who count by touch can tell the difference even if they pretend not to." He smiled. "I did not tell her I told you I told her." Eddard said nothing for a long moment, measuring the words not by their sound but by the weight they put on particular beams. "You are playing me," he said, "and her, and you believe this to be a game." "I play because the table is always set," Littlefinger said. "I would be a fool to stare at an empty wall when there is a board and pieces and men who cannot resist their own moves. You are not one of those men. That is why I said you amuse me. You move as if the rules matter instead of the pieces. It gives me a new thing to look at. Will you be very angry if I begin to love you a little?" Eddard ignored the provocation. 2 days, he said. "Then the ladies go to the Holdfast. On that day, when they are across, you will ensure that the gates to the Holdfast can be raised and lowered with my men on the winches. Not yours, not hers, not the king's. If anyone inquires, you will smile and tell them that chains require oil and the oil was misplaced and needed to be found. Do not let the chains sing when they move. I am charmed by your engineering, Littlefinger said. The song of a chain is my favorite music. Very well. The chains will be polite. Eddard gestured toward the door. Go back where you came from, or use an actual hallway like a man. I am not a man, Peter said. I am a story, and stories prefer stairs no one else knows. He rose, bowed with a courtesy that had mockery in it and respect as well, and vanished into the wall with a soft click. The 2 days passed with the city pretending to itself it preferred hanging laundry to hanging men. On the morning of the second, the ladies gathered with shawls and icons and faces arranged into the particular look women wear when they have decided to be brave for one another because the men are busy being brave for themselves. The queen came with them because she would not be absent when a room full of power moved inside another room and made itself collective. Sansa walked in that procession as if she were stepping onto a different stage. Arya walked 10 paces behind because her father had told her to and because the sight of the holdfast with its thick walls made her want to climb something high enough to spit from. Septa Mordain counted her charges aloud and then counted them again. Renly walked alongside, smiling like a sponsor. Loras walked behind him, ready to spring if a rope snapped. When they reached the bridge that joined the Red Keep to Maegor's Holdfast, Eddard's men were already in place at the winches, and Littlefinger's man with the oil had nothing to do because he had done it the night before. The chains moved without song. The bridge lowered. The ladies passed. The queen paused and looked back and saw Eddard standing with his stick and his 2 men and offered him a smile so small he might have imagined it. He inclined his head. The bridge raised. The chains remained discreet. The holdfast held. It was as they were closing the gates of the holdfast that Jaime Lannister walked out of the White Sword Tower with his hands empty and his gaze full. He had received no new orders. He had grown bored. He went down to the yard and stood and watched men move and felt the interesting sensation of being irrelevant and therefore dangerous. He saw Barristan across the yard bow his head to the children and smile at something Tommen said that the world would have called slow and Barristan called thoughtful. He walked toward them not quickly and not slowly, and men watched without seeming to watch. He stopped 10 paces away and waited. Barristan turned, felt the shift in the yard's attention, and faced him. Ser, Jaime said.
Ser, Barristan answered.
I am told to remain in my rooms, Jaime said. I have done so longer than I prefer. You have done us all a service, Barristan said. You will continue. I think I will not, Jaime replied. He smiled. It was a lovely smile, the sort that floats on the surface like oil. I think I will walk where I please. He took 1 step forward and felt the yard breathe in. He took a second and saw 2 of Eddard's Northmen move from shadow to light, both with the sort of expression that fails to be impressed by a golden man with a sword because winter's cold renders gold silly. He took a third and saw Renly at the far end of the yard shift his pair from hand to hand as if keeping it from rolling, and Loras's hand go to the hilt and then stay there, sensible for once. He took a fourth and saw Robert at the gallery watch and not send the order he might have sent a week ago. Jaime took a 5th step and stopped. Do not, Barristan said, softly enough that only those nearest heard. Jaime considered him. He considered the children. He considered the yard. He considered the chains that had just moved. He considered his father's letter and his sister's face. He considered his own reflection hovering in the blade he had not drawn. He smiled again and, with a courtier's grace, bowed to Barristan Selmy as if they were young men doing a dance they both would pretend to enjoy. As you wish, he said lightly. That night in the Hand's chambers, Eddard slept 4 hours and woke once to the feeling of the cold wind that had haunted his dreams. He rose and went to the window and looked out at the city, where a blaze in the distance marked a warehouse fire, and in the street below 2 men argued in a way that suggested they were only practicing for a better argument later. He leaned his hands on the sill and closed his eyes and heard Winterfell in his blood, the stable noises, the crackle of pine, the laugh of a boy who had not remembered to look back before running forward. He breathed. He would not go home soon. He would make this place enough like home that it could bear his care without rejecting it. He went back to bed. In the morning, the raven from Riverrun bore worse news. Sir Adam Marbrand had been seen on the Gold Road with 200 men and torches, and the small watercourse west of Pink Maiden had been fouled with carcasses. Eddard read the letter with the unflinching eyes of men who have had to read worse and refused to allow it to become a habit. He sent a message back to Edmure. Hold. I send Ser Barristan with 50 good men to escort children to the safety of the Trident. He wrote the words and then sat back and stared at them. He crossed out children and wrote refugees. Then he crossed that and wrote small folk. He did not wish to have his words read by men looking for insult. He took the letter to Robert. Barristan will leave the city, Robert said, when he had read. It will leave a hole. It will fill with a lesser man, Eddard said. And we will bear it. Robert sighed. We will. Tell the old knight he can play rescuer once more. It will please his bones to feel useful somewhere that has not yet been measured by this castle's stones. When Barristan received the order, he bowed his head, and his mouth briefly forgot to be stern. He would ride with 50 and bring in 200 if he could. He would teach children to trust the sound of his voice, which is a rarer trust than men like to think. He would do it because it was his oath as much as stabbing a man in the back of the leg with a whetted truth. In the same hour, Cersei stood in Maegor's holdfast with her hand upon the sill of a window and watched the bridge. Littlefinger's men were at the winches. Eddard's men were at the doors. Hers were standing where they were meant to stand. She placed her intention upon the bridge and imagined men falling into the water below. She imagined the chain sticking. She imagined the queen at the far side while someone else held her key. She set the images aside as a housewife sets aside the goose because the oven is not yet hot. She would wait. And then, at last, the knot that the boy had drawn tight with his hand found a finger and began to pull. Joffrey slipped again by night to the door he had learned and opened it, buoyed by the success that makes boys insufficiently suspicious. He passed into the dark with his chest adrum. He moved along the passage with the same impatience he wore in the yard. He miscounted steps and turned too soon, then righted himself with a small curse he imagined was a man's. He heard voices and flattened himself and listened, a smile preening on his face. They were not the voices he'd expected. No eunuch, no foreign honeyed baritone. He heard instead the careful whistle of a man from the city and the low rumble of another from the hills beyond. He heard a name pronounced in a way that made the name mean less than the thing. The name was Slint. He heard coin. He heard a number. He heard a time. He heard a door. He made it back to his bed and lay with his eyes open and pictured the thing that would be done at the hour named. A gate half shut, a turning of men at exactly the place where they would become sheep. He slept, finally, and dreamed of drawing his sword in the yard and having it turn into a flag. In the morning he went to his mother and told her. Cersei's eyes darkened, and for a moment she hated and loved the boy because of the power he had placed in her hand. She measured it. She sent a servant with a note to a man who owed her 2 favors and told him to tell the eunuch's boy a story. She sent a second servant with another note to a different man who would stand by the door of Janos Slint's office at the hour named and whistle a tune the commander liked. She sent a third to Peter Baelish with no note at all, because sometimes the most eloquent thing she could do for him was to send him nothing. He would understand the shape of absence. By noon, Varys had heard 2 of those stories and did not like either. He went to Eddard and told him in simple speech that the hour to arrest Janos Slint for conduct unbefitting a man sworn to the city had arrived. Eddard said no because he believed in windows where men can keep their honor and because he believed in traps that reveal themselves when a trap is stepped in. He did not consider that belief a naivete. He considered it a choice that owed itself to his own oath. Varys bowed and went to Robert and told him the same story in a different order and received the same answer, this time with a breadth of humor. I will not cut another man's purse while he is carrying my coin, Robert said. If he drops it, I will pick it up. If he steals from me, I will take his hand. If he stands where he was told to stand and fails only to notice a thing, I will tell him to keep looking. I am not patient. I am not vindictive either when it is a waste. The hour came. The gate, Lion's Gate, which liked its name because it liked to believe itself special, was not half shut as it had been planned by a man in a soft chair with a soft coin. It stood open. Slint stood with two men in his visor shadow. He looked at the man who was supposed to come and sign the slip with the new orders, and the man did not come because he was in a bed with his throat cut for reasons rearranged by the eunuch the hour before. Instead, a note came rolled like a sausage with the hand's seal on it and Slint's name within it and these words: "If you move one of your men from his post before the noon bell, you will be relieved of your duty." Slint read it, glared, and did not move his men. The noon bell rang. No men came. The gate held its pose and pretended to be merely a gate and not a place where the city decides what it will be by nightfall. The men with the red cords under their mail shirts went to the wrong gate and were made to show their fish barrels to a polite Northman with a tired smile and a quick knife. Joffrey felt the strange adult disappointment that comes when a plot you have decided is yours to control fails to appear when you want to watch it. He paced. He tried to go to the yard and was told no. He fumed and told his mother he was not a boy. She told him no and then told him yes to something else so he would not remember the first thing. He accepted the trade and told himself he had made a bargain on his own terms. Cersei went to Littlefinger and smiled and said she hoped he had enjoyed his absent note, and he laughed and told her that nothing written in invisible ink lasts as long as the feeling it causes. Varys sat and ate a small pear without tasting it and felt old. What did happen at noon was this. A note arrived from the Reach. Mace Tyrell would send bread and men and would look very handsome doing both. His letters were florid. Renly read them aloud with a gentle mockery anyone would hear and laugh at. Eddard heard the numbers underneath and counted them twice behind his eyes. Another note came from Dorne, full of sand and courtesy and nothing else. A third arrived from Lisa. That one had milk dripping from its corners and told Eddard to leave her alone with her boy or she would teach the mountains to speak unkindly of him. That evening, when the lamps made gold coins of the light on the walls and the bow of the moon hung like a piece of jewelry, Robert sent for Cersei. She came and sat with her legs crossed and her anger disguised as poise and listened while he told her that she would continue seeing her children every day at the hour the old knight set and would not complain of his lessons. And she smiled and said she would begin to enjoy old men when the world gave her better examples of them. And he smiled back and said she would enjoy a world with fewer blades if she allowed herself. It was not quite peace. It was a kind of truce built of exhaustion. He did not insult either of them by naming it. On the 8th morning, before the hour when the kitchens began to swear at their pots, the Ravencoat yielded a bird with a strip tied to its leg. It was from the Riverlands, and the hand that had scrawled it was not Edmure's but a scribe who had written in a hurry, with his fear in his wrist. The words were, "Lady Catelyn took Tyrion Lannister at the Inn of the Crossroads. He is at the Eyrie. Lord Tywin's men have taken 3 hamlets to punish, and Lord Tywin writes that he is operating under the law of the writ of retaliation. Men whisper that this is a law he wrote himself. Ser Vardis Egen arranged a trial. The imp has demanded trial by combat. The cell's word will fight." Eddard read it and put it down and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. He felt no anger at Catelyn. He felt the shock of a man who has asked a friend to hold fast and sees that the friend has instead picked something up. He went to Robert and placed the paper in his hand. Robert laughed and swore and laughed again, because the world had decided to be ridiculous in a way he had always half hoped for and half dreaded. "The little one will wriggle out somehow," he said with ugly admiration. "As for Tywin, he knows which words make a banner and which make a blade." He sat back. "We will not let it be his choice which it becomes." He sent orders. Eddard layered them with sensibilities that made certain men feel honored to do what they were going to do anyway. Stannis added a strip of iron to the end of each one. Renly made nets of small courtesy to catch those who might otherwise slip away. The city's breath held itself between the teeth as if anticipating a blow. The boar's hide in the king's chamber curled at the edges and required more oil. The painted stars remained painted, their indifference a comfort and an insult. That night, as the holdfast slept with an entire half of the court within its belly, a shadow on the bridge paused, turned and retreated. It belonged to a man with a delicate step and a stiff shoulder from a long-ago fall. He went back to tell the queen that tonight was not the night. She told him to go away and came to the window and put her palm to the stone and thought of her father's hand on a map. She told herself she was patient. She told herself she was more patient than any man in this castle. She told herself she would wait. She slept with her eyes closed and her mind listing. In bed in the Tower of the Hand, Arya turned over and over, a small restless beast in a den. She dreamed of a door and of cats laughing and of a bearded man who bowled apples down a long corridor and told her that some fruit loved to be bruised. She woke and thrust her hair out of her face and sat up and thought she heard Sirio's voice say, "Water can be patient without being still." She got up and went to the window and pressed her forehead to the glass and decided that if she had to stay, she would be an eel and not a stone. And outside the walls, beyond the eyes of the men who watched and counted and guessed and pretended not to guess, a campfire guttered along the King's Road as a man with yellow hair and a joke in his pocket argued with a knight whose honor was new and not yet burned on. The small man drank and smiled and persuaded the knight to accept the rules he was offering because the man was very good at offering rules at moments when the man offered them looked like he had invented them himself. And 1,000 miles away, a girl with silver hair and a child inside her listened to her husband talk of riding and rivers, and the future gathered itself, as it always does, indifferent to men's schedules and charters and to the precise arrangement of chairs in a chamber where a king had decided not to die. The next day brought the clink of armor muffled by cloth in the corridors of Maegor's Holdfast, because the queen had decided that rehearsal created certainty. The day after brought a ship from the Vale with rumors on its deck, and an ache in its wood where the high road had lain on its planks for a full day's worth of conversation before it found the sea. The day after that brought a fight in a tavern in Flea Bottom between two men who both claimed to be serving the same lord, and Slint sent men, and the men arrested both, and one disappeared by night with a purse of coin in his mouth, so that if he were caught with it he could say he had merely eaten well. On the 4th day, the chains on the Holdfast gate sang once despite all efforts, and 3 men looked up as if they had been tapped on the shoulder by the same hand, and only one of them smiled. On the 5th day, the Riverlands sent a new raven begging for swords. On the 6th day, Jaime came out in the yard with his sword unbelted and asked Barristan for a bout. Not to the blood, not to the bruise, but to the boredom. Barristan refused politely because boredom had never purchased him anything of value. Jaime went and found a post and hit it until his hands bled and made a joke about being a boy, and Loras watched from the edge and learned 3 things he had not known about the other man's footwork. On the 7th day, Stannis sat with Eddard at the table and drew lines that were not there and called them law and told the other man that if he wished to hold men to the thing it said he must be willing to swing and not merely weigh, and Eddard said he was willing, and Stannis believed him enough to let him go to sleep without repeating himself. On the 8th day, Robert stood in his chamber and lifted a small weight with his left hand and then with his right and then with his left again and grinned like a boy because the ache was a friend who had decided to stay but not to bite. On the 9th day, a storm came in off the bay and washed the red out of the banners for an hour and made the city smell clean for a quarter of a day. And on the 10th day, when the city had begun to believe it could live forever in the anxious present without the future's hand finding its shoulder, the future arrived at the Lion Gate in the shape of a delegation under a yellow banner with a lion upon it and the words of Tywin Lannister spoken by a man with his chin held like a lesser weapon. Lord Tywin will not come. He bids the king recall what it means to demand that a father come to a city where his children are held hostage by a man who calls it courtesy. He bids the king not to mistake patience for cowardice. He bids the king, if he wishes to avoid blood, to name a day when he will send his hand to Harrenhal to parley in the light of the old gods and the new. He suggests, if the king will have nothing else, that Ser Jaime be returned to the work for which he was sworn. Robert listened and felt the warmth in his blood, the warmth that comes not from drink but from decision. He said, "Tell your lord I bid him remember what it means to refuse a summons. Tell him I bid him remember that when the king sends a letter, men read. Tell him I will not send my hand to him to be lectured on his own soil. Tell him if he wishes to be heard he must come and be heard. Tell him he has until the moon is new." The man bowed with the respect of a messenger who has learned to accept that the messages he carries are not his fault. He rode out. The gate closed behind him with the finality of a thing that has not yet decided to stay closed. That night, in her room in Maegor's Holdfast, Cersei sat with her back straight and told herself a story about the lioness and the shepherd once more. When she reached the part where the cubs returned to her with the smell of another on them, she altered the ending. In her new version, she ate the shepherd and did not tell her children his name. She slept and dreamed of chains not singing. In the White Sword Tower, Jaime traced his finger down the page of the White Book and stopped at his own name and laughed softly because the words under it were thin. He wrote none new and put the quill aside and lay down in his clothes and slept because men who know how to wait for the right moment know how to endure the wrong hours. In the Tower of the Hand, Arya put on the face she had learned that made servants ignore her and slipped out and found the cat with half an ear and followed it until it went where cats go when they refuse to be chased. She laughed quietly and felt like a person who has invented air. She went back to her room and slept, elbows on her pillow like a sailor holding fast in a storm and not even knowing what a ship was. Eddard stood at his window and watched the city refuse to distinguish between omen and weather. He thought of Catelyn, and of the boy Tyrion in the Eyrie, and of his sister lying in a room where the light had been wrong and where he had promised something to a man who had no right to hear it and every right to be told. He thought of his king still alive. He thought of the law that came ashore with Stannis like a boat too heavy to haul. He thought of bread and of hammers and of children with crumbs on their sleeves, and of a boy in a forge who looked at a hammer the way some boys look at crowns. He closed his eyes and held in his hands the day that had passed and the day to come, feeling their weight as a smith feels the weight of metal, with love, with knowledge, and with the awareness that something will be made that cannot easily be unmade. The city breathed. The keep waited. The holdfast held. The chains did not sing. And beyond the gates, beyond men's cleverness, beyond the reach of courtiers and the patience of kings, the river ran on with a long, low murmur that has always and only said one thing: that all of this is a story laid across water, and water remembers every crossing without caring which lord's banner flickers as it passes.